The Christmas lights twinkled beautifully in my parents' living room, but the warmth stopped at the decorations. "Megan's between jobs again," my father announced to the entire family, his voice dripping with that familiar disappointment I'd heard my whole life. My younger sister Emily didn't miss her chance. She laughed and said, "She's always been a failure. Some people just don't have what it takes." 23 relatives sat around that table. Not one person defended me. Not one person asked if I was okay. I was invisible just like I'd been for 47 years. What they didn't know was that I'd spent the last decade building something in silence, something that would change millions of lives, something worth $50 million. I sat there, calmly taking a sip of water, watching them enjoy their jokes at my expense. I felt strangely peaceful, because I knew something they didn't. Then my mother's eyes drifted to the television in the corner. Her face went pale. Her wine glass slipped from her fingers. "Oh my God!" she screamed. "Turn on the TV right now!" Every head turned to the screen, and there, in crystal clear high definition, was my face alongside the words, "Time Magazine Person of the Year." The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I'd ever heard. But here's what you need to understand. This moment didn't happen by accident. Behind it lies 20 years of betrayal, stolen identity, family secrets, and a revenge so perfectly executed that my family never saw it coming. Stay with me until the end, because what my family did to me and what happened to them after this night will leave you absolutely speechless. My name is Megan Torres. I'm 47 years old, and for most of my life I've been the family disappointment, at least according to the people who share my blood. What they didn't know as they gathered around that Christmas dinner table in 2024 was that I had spent the past decade quietly building a technology empire worth $50 million. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to that evening, to the moment everything changed. The Torres family Christmas dinner was always held at my parents' house in suburban New Jersey. My mother spent weeks preparing polishing silver arranging flowers, coordinating the menu with military precision. The house looked like something from a holiday magazine, garlands wrapped around the staircase banister candles, flickering in every window, a 12-foot Douglas fir, decorated with ornaments collected over 50 years of marriage. Everything was designed to project the image of a perfect, loving family. The image, of course, was a lie. I arrived at exactly 6 o'clock as requested. Not a minute early, not a minute late. I had learned long ago that arriving early meant enduring more time in that house, while arriving late gave my father ammunition for criticism. Punctuality was my shield. 23 relatives filled the living room and dining area when I walked in. Aunts, uncles, cousins, their spouses, their children, the full Torres clan assembled in all its chaotic glory. The noise hit me first. Laughter, overlapping conversations, the clink of glasses, Christmas music playing softly beneath it all. The smell came next, roasted turkey, cinnamon, pine needles, and my mother's famous apple pie cooling on the kitchen counter. I hung my coat in the closet and made my way into the crowd. Nobody greeted me. This wasn't unusual. I had perfected the art of being present yet invisible over decades of practice. I moved through the room like a ghost, catching fragments of conversations that flowed around me, but never included me. Emily just got promoted to senior vice president. My Aunt Carol was telling a cluster of relatives near the fireplace. Can you believe it? Youngest in her company's history? And did you see pictures of her new beach house in the Hamptons? Uncle Richard added. 4 bedrooms right on the water. Marcus must be doing well too. My younger sister Emily stood at the center of attention as always. At 44, she had mastered the art of appearing humble while ensuring everyone knew exactly how successful she was. Her designer dress probably cost more than my first car. Her highlights were fresh, her manicure perfect, her smile practiced and gleaming. "Oh, stop," Emily said with a wave of her hand, the enormous diamond on her finger catching the light. "We've just been blessed. Really, it's all about hard work and making smart choices." Her eyes found me across the room. The smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered behind it. Recognition, dismissal. the particular cruelty that only siblings can master. I found my seat at the dining table literally at the edge, squeezed between a wall and my teenage nephew, who was absorbed in his phone. The seat placement was not accidental. Nothing in this family was accidental. Dinner was served with great ceremony. My mother orchestrated the parade of dishes like a conductor leading a symphony. Turkey ham, 3 kinds of potatoes, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce, fresh rolls. The bounty of a family that had done well in America, as my father liked to remind everyone. Conversations continued flowing around me. My cousin Jennifer talked about her daughter's acceptance to Princeton. Uncle Michael described his recent golf trip to Scotland. Aunt Patricia shared photos of her new grandchild. Everyone had news. Everyone had achievements worth celebrating. Nobody asked about my life. Nobody inquired about my work, my health, my hopes, or my struggles. I might as well have been an empty chair. I ate quietly, watching my family with the detached curiosity of an anthropologist studying a foreign tribe. These people shared my DNA, my childhood memories, my last name. Yet they knew nothing about who I really was. They had never bothered to look. Then came the toast. My father stood at the head of the table, crystal glass, raised high commanding attention with the ease of a man who had always been obeyed. Robert Torres was 72 years old, still handsome in that distinguished way that aging men often achieve, with silver hair and a commanding presence that had served him well in his decades as a corporate attorney. "I want to thank everyone for being here." He began, his voice carrying effortlessly over the crowd. "Family is everything. The Torres family has always stuck together, supported each other, celebrated each other's successes." He paused, letting his gaze sweep the room. When his eyes reached me, they stopped. "Of course we support each other through challenges, too." His tone shifted slightly, taking on an edge of amusement. "For instance, our Megan here is between jobs again." Laughter rippled around the table. Not malicious laughter exactly, more the comfortable chuckling of people who had heard this joke before and found it reliably entertaining. Poor Megan, always struggling. What else is new? "How long has it been this time?" someone asked. "Oh, who can keep track?" My father replied with a shrug that communicated everything. Disappointment, resignation, the exhausted patience of a parent burdened with a perpetual failure. I kept my face neutral. I had learned long ago that showing pain only invited more attacks. My family was like sharks; they could smell blood in the water from miles away. Emily seized her moment. She turned to me with an expression of practiced sympathy, the kind you might offer a sick animal. "Don't worry, Megan," she said sweetly. "Some people just aren't meant for traditional success. There's no shame in that. You have other qualities." She couldn't even name one. "She's always been a failure," Emily continued, now addressing the table at large. "Ever since we were kids, some people just don't have what it takes. But we love her anyway, right?" More laughter, more nodding. The family consensus confirmed once again Megan Torres was the cautionary tale, the disappointment, the one who never quite figured it out. I watched them all with strange clarity. My father, who had never once asked about my dreams. My mother, who had learned to look away when the cruelty was distributed. My sister, who had built her confidence on the foundation of my humiliation. My relatives, who needed someone to feel superior to and had chosen me decades ago. Something was different this time. The words that had once cut like knives now felt like raindrops on a window present, but unable to reach me. I observed my family as if watching strangers. These people had never known my true worth because they had never bothered to look. A slight smile crossed my face. Nobody noticed. Nobody ever did. And then my mother's eyes drifted to the television mounted in the corner of the dining room. It had been playing silently all evening, some holiday special no one was watching. But now a different program had come on, a special feature. And my mother's face was transforming from polite hostess to something I had never seen before. Shock, confusion, and dawning recognition. Her wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor. "Oh my God!" she screamed. "Turn on the TV right now!" Every head in the dining room turned toward my mother. She stood frozen, one hand still extended where the wine glass had been red liquid pooling around the broken crystal at her feet. Her eyes were fixed on the television screen with an expression I had never seen on her face before, something between confusion and fear. My father was the first to react. "Linda, what on earth is wrong with you? You're making a scene." But my mother didn't respond. She just pointed at the television, her finger trembling slightly. Uncle Richard, who was closest to the entertainment center, grabbed the remote and turned up the volume. The room fell silent as everyone's attention shifted to the screen. A Time magazine special program filled the display. The title card read, "Women Who Built Empires in Silence," in elegant gold lettering. A distinguished female journalist was introducing the segment, her voice smooth and professional. "Tonight, we bring you the extraordinary stories of women who transformed industries without ever seeking the spotlight. These are not the billionaires who grace magazine covers monthly or the tech moguls who dominate social media. These are the quiet revolutionaries who changed millions of lives while remaining virtually unknown to the general public." The screen transitioned to footage of a sleek office building, then to images of elderly Americans using tablet devices with simplified interfaces. The journalist continued her narration. "Our first feature focuses on an entrepreneur who identified a crisis hiding in plain sight, the technological abandonment of aging Americans. While Silicon Valley chased younger demographics, she built a company that now serves over 2 million seniors nationwide." The footage shifted to an interview setting. A woman sat in a comfortable chair, speaking to someone off camera. The lighting was soft professional. Her face was partially visible, a 3/4 profile that revealed her features gradually as she gestured while speaking. "I realized that my grandmother couldn't use the smartphone my cousins gave her for Christmas," the woman on screen was saying. Her voice was calm, articulate, passionate. Not because she wasn't intelligent, she was brilliant, but because no one had designed technology with her in mind. That's when I knew what I needed to build. I kept my eyes on my plate, but I could feel the shift in the room. The energy changed. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. My cousin Jennifer spoke first. "Wait, does she look familiar to anyone else?" "I was just thinking that—" Aunt Patricia agreed, leaning forward in her chair. "Something about her face, the way she moves her hands when she talks." The woman on screen turned slightly more toward the camera, revealing more of her profile. She was discussing the challenges of building a company while being underestimated, her words measured and thoughtful. "The hardest part wasn't the technology or the funding," she said. "The hardest part was believing in myself when everyone around me had already decided I would fail." My mother made a small sound, something between a gasp and a whisper. She looked at me, then back at the screen, then at me again. Her face had gone pale. Emily burst out laughing. "Oh my God, Mom, you cannot be serious right now." She shook her head, her perfect highlights catching the light. "Wait, you think that looks like Megan, please? That woman is talking about running a company worth millions of dollars." The table erupted in relieved laughter. Of course it wasn't Megan. How could it be Megan? The very idea was absurd. Megan was sitting right here unemployed as usual, wearing a dress that was probably 5 years old. Megan couldn't run a company. Megan couldn't even keep a regular job. "The resemblance is a little uncanny, though," Uncle Michael admitted, squinting at the screen. "Must be one of those doppelganger situations. Everyone has one, they say." "Megan's doppelganger is a millionaire entrepreneur," my cousin's husband joked. "That's got to be some kind of cosmic irony." More laughter, more shaking heads. The tension that had briefly gripped the room dissipated as quickly as it had arrived. The explanation was simple, obvious, comfortable coincidence. A stranger who happened to share some facial features with the family disappointment. But not everyone was laughing. Aunt Margaret, my father's eldest sister, sat at the far end of the table. She was 81 years old, a retired school teacher who had never married and had spent her life watching more than she spoke. The family often forgot she was there. She was quiet, unobtrusive, easy to overlook. But Aunt Margaret noticed things others missed. She remembered things others forgot. She wasn't laughing now. Instead, she tilted her head slightly and studied the screen with intense concentration. Then her gaze shifted to me, examining my face with the same careful attention. Back to the screen, back to me. Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, and I saw something flicker across her expression. Recognition, certainty. Our eyes met across the table. I held her gaze for just a moment, long enough to confirm what she suspected, short enough that no one else noticed the exchange. A slight nod, barely perceptible. Her eyebrows rose fractionally. Then she looked away, reaching for her water glass, with a hand that trembled slightly. She knew. But she wouldn't say anything. Aunt Margaret had always understood things the rest of the family refused to see. The program continued, but the interview segment was ending. The journalist promised more details after the commercial break, including the entrepreneur's full name and the remarkable story of how she built her empire from nothing. "Can we change the channel?" Emily asked, already bored. "This is depressing. Some random businesswoman talking about old people and tablets. It's Christmas." My father nodded, reaching for the remote. "Put on something festive. That holiday movie marathon should still be running." The channel changed. The woman who looked like me disappeared, replaced by a black and white classic, showing a man running through snowy streets shouting, "Merry Christmas," to everyone he passed. The family returned to their conversations, the moment already forgotten. Jennifer resumed her story about Princeton. Uncle Michael started a new anecdote about his golf game. Emily checked her phone, probably posting photos of her picture-perfect Christmas to social media. I sat very still, my heart beating steadily despite what had just occurred. I had always known this moment would come eventually, the moment when my two lives collided. I had built walls between them for years, keeping my business success completely separate from my family, never mentioning my company, never hinting at what I had accomplished. They had never asked about my life, so I had never told them. But I hadn't expected the collision to happen like this. Here, now, in the middle of Christmas dinner, surrounded by the very people who had dismissed me for decades. The commercial break would end soon. The program would return. My full name would be displayed on the screen for everyone to see. Part of me wanted to leave before that happened, to slip out, quietly preserve my secret a little longer, avoid the confrontation that was barreling toward us like a freight train. But another part of me, a part that had grown stronger over the past decade, wanted to stay, wanted to watch their faces when the truth was revealed, wanted to finally be seen by the people who had spent a lifetime looking through me. I was still deciding what to do when my phone rang. The ringtone cut through the holiday chatter like a knife, a distinctive sound that I had programmed specifically for priority contacts. It was the ringtone I used for my executive team for urgent business matters that couldn't wait. The sound of a life my family knew nothing about. Every conversation stopped. Every eye turned toward me. I looked at the screen. The caller ID displayed my chief operating officer's name. Emily stared at my phone with undisguised curiosity. "Since when do you have a ringtone like that? That sounds like something a CEO would use." I stood slowly, phone in hand. "Excuse me," I said quietly. "I need to take this." I stepped into the hallway, phone pressed to my ear, but my mind was already traveling backward through time. The ringtone, the stairs, the moment of exposure hovering just around the corner, all of it triggered memories I had spent decades trying to bury. As my COO briefed me on a minor crisis that could wait until morning, I found myself transported back 29 years to the moment when I first learned what my family truly thought of me. I was 18 years old, fresh out of high school, working as a cashier at a grocery store while trying to figure out how to afford college. My grades had been excellent, not that anyone in my family had noticed, and I had dreams of studying business, maybe even starting my own company someday. Those dreams required money I didn't have, so I had applied for student loans, confident that my clean record and steady employment would qualify me for at least something. The rejection letter arrived on a Tuesday in August. I remember standing at the mailbox, reading the words over and over, unable to comprehend what they meant. My application had been denied due to existing debt obligations and a severely damaged credit score. But I had no debt. I had never borrowed money in my life. I had never even owned a credit card. There had to be a mistake. I called the bank the next morning, navigating through endless automated menus until I finally reached a human being. The representative was sympathetic but firm. According to their records, I had taken out a personal loan of $15,000 18 months earlier. The loan was severely delinquent, with only minimal payments made sporadically. My credit score had been devastated. I asked them to send me the documentation. When the envelope arrived 3 days later, my hands shook as I opened it. The loan application was filled out with my personal information: my name, my social security number, my date of birth. The address listed was my parents' home. The signature at the bottom was supposed to be mine, but I had never seen it before. Someone had forged my name in handwriting that looked nothing like my own. The funds had been withdrawn in cash on September 3rd, 18 months prior. That date meant nothing to me at first. I stared at it, trying to remember what had happened in September of that year. Then it hit me like a physical blow. September 3rd was exactly 1 week before Emily started her freshman year at Syracuse University. I knew what her tuition cost because my parents had discussed it openly at dinner, proudly announcing that they would make sure Emily got the best education possible. What they hadn't discussed was how they planned to pay for it. My father's law practice had been struggling that year. I remembered the tense conversations, the unopened bills piling up on the kitchen counter. The timing was not coincidental. I confronted my parents that evening after Emily had gone out with friends. I laid the bank documents on the kitchen table and demanded an explanation. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. My father's face hardened into the expression I knew too well, the one that meant I had crossed a line, challenged his authority, made myself a problem. My mother looked away, suddenly fascinated by something outside the window, her hands twisting a dish towel into knots. "You went through private financial documents," my father asked, his voice dangerously calm. "Someone took out a loan in my name. Someone forged my signature. Someone destroyed my credit." I kept my voice steady, despite the trembling in my chest. "I have a right to know who did this to me." The silence stretched between us. Then my mother spoke, still not meeting my eyes. "Emily needed help," she said quietly. Her own credit application was rejected. She was just 17, she didn't have any credit history. We had to find another way. The words hung in the air, confirming everything I had feared. "You used my identity," I said. "You forged my name. You took out a loan that I'm now responsible for." My father stood, drawing himself up to his full height, using his physical presence the way he always did when he wanted to intimidate. "Emily was too young to understand the consequences. She needed that money for college. You're the older sister. You should want to help your family." "Help my family?" The words came out strangled. "I can't get student loans now. I can't qualify for anything. You've destroyed my future so Emily could have hers." "Don't be so dramatic." My father waved his hand dismissively. "It's just paperwork. We'll pay it back eventually. In the meantime, you need to keep quiet about this. The last thing we need is Emily feeling guilty about something that wasn't her fault." Not her fault. Emily had used my identity to steal $15,000, and somehow it wasn't her fault. I was supposed to sacrifice my dreams, my opportunities, my future, and stay silent about it to protect her feelings. My mother finally looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes that might have been guilt. "Please, Megan, for the family, it's not that big a deal." Not that big a deal. Those words would echo through the next decade of my life, as I worked minimum wage jobs while Emily graduated debt-free, as I got rejected for apartments because of my credit score while Emily moved into a luxury high-rise, as I scraped together pennies for community college classes while Emily's Syracuse degree opened doors I would never be allowed to walk through. The family never paid back the loan. Eventually, it went to collections. The damage to my credit lasted for years, a scarlet letter that followed me everywhere I tried to go. But I kept the documents, every single page. I filed them away in a folder labeled Important Papers, though I didn't fully understand why at the time. Something instinctive told me to preserve the evidence. Someday, I thought this might matter. Someday I might need proof of what they did. It was years later, during one of my sleepless nights reviewing those old documents, that I noticed something I had missed before. On the loan application below Emily's forged signature of my name, there was a space for a cosigner. The cosigner line wasn't blank. The handwriting was different from the forged signature above, more careful, more practiced. But I recognized it immediately. I had seen it on birthday cards, permission slips, grocery lists, my entire childhood. My mother had co-signed the fraudulent loan application. She hadn't just looked away while it happened. She hadn't just stayed silent to keep peace. She had actively participated in stealing my identity and my future. The discovery of my mother's signature on that loan application changed something fundamental in how I understood my family. She wasn't just a passive bystander who failed to protect me. She was an active participant in my destruction. That knowledge hardened something inside me, calcified the last soft places where hope still lived. But it would take 7 more years before I finally found the courage to leave. I was 25 years old the night I walked out of my parents' house for the last time. It was December, a week before Christmas, and the Torres family was celebrating Emily's latest triumph, a promotion to regional manager at her marketing firm. The house was filled with relatives' champagne and the sound of congratulations I had heard countless times before. I moved through the gathering like a shadow, refilling drinks, clearing plates, doing the invisible work that no one acknowledged. I had stepped into the hallway to escape the noise when I heard my father's voice drifting from his study. The door was slightly ajar, and he was speaking to my Uncle Richard, his tone casual and matter-of-fact. "Emily is our pride and legacy," my father said. "She's everything we hoped for in a daughter. Smart, ambitious, successful. She'll carry the Torres name forward with distinction." "And Megan?" Uncle Richard asked. My father laughed softly. "Megan is just Megan. She'll never amount to anything. Some people are born to shine, and some people are born to watch from the sidelines. We learned a long time ago not to expect much from her." The words didn't surprise me. I had heard variations of this sentiment my entire life, in the dismissive glances, the forgotten birthdays, the conversations that stopped when I entered a room. But hearing it stated so plainly, as simple fact as obvious truth, that required no explanation or defense, something inside me finally broke. Or perhaps something finally set itself free. I climbed the stairs to my childhood bedroom, moving quietly so no one would notice my absence from the party. Not that anyone would notice anyway. I pulled a suitcase from my closet, the same one I had used for a school trip years ago, and began packing. I didn't take much. Clothes, toiletries, a few photographs from before everything went wrong. The folder of documents proving the loan fraud. Some cash I had saved from my waitressing job hidden in a sock drawer where no one would think to look. Downstairs, laughter erupted as someone made a toast to Emily's continued success. Glasses clinked. Music played. The celebration continued without interruption. I carried my suitcase down the stairs, past the living room where my family gathered, through the front hallway to the door. I put on my coat, wrapped a scarf around my neck, and picked up my bag. No one noticed. No one asked where I was going. No one called out to stop me. No one even glanced in my direction. I opened the front door and stepped into the December night. Snow was falling softly, covering the lawn and sidewalk in a thin white blanket. The streetlights cast yellow circles on the empty road. The cold hit my face, immediately sharp and clean and somehow clarifying. I stood on the porch for a moment, looking back at the house where I had spent 25 years of my life. Through the window, I could see my family laughing, talking, celebrating. They had no idea I was leaving. They probably wouldn't notice for hours, maybe not until the next morning. This thought, which should have devastated me instead, brought a strange peace. I had nothing left to lose here because I had never had anything to begin with. You cannot miss what was never given. You cannot mourn what was never real. I walked down the porch steps, my suitcase wheels leaving tracks in the fresh snow. I had no plan beyond getting to the bus station. No apartment lined up, no job waiting, no safety net of any kind. Just $243 in my pocket, and a determination to build a life where my worth wasn't determined by people who refused to see me. I was halfway down the sidewalk when a voice called out from the darkness, "Megan, wait!" I turned to see Mrs. Patterson hurrying across her lawn, a heavy coat thrown over her nightgown slippers, leaving footprints in the snow. Dorothy Patterson was 70 years old, a widow who had lived next door to my family since before I was born. She was quiet, unobtrusive, the kind of neighbor who waved politely but rarely engaged in conversation. I barely knew her beyond exchanging pleasantries about the weather. She reached me slightly out of breath and took both my hands in hers. Her fingers were warm despite the cold, her grip surprisingly strong. "I've been watching," she said quietly. "All these years I've been watching how they treat you. I've seen things through windows that would break your heart if you knew. And I've been waiting for this night, the night you finally leave." Before I could respond, she pressed something into my palm. I looked down and saw folded bills. $200. "Mrs. Patterson, I can't." "You can and you will." Her voice was firm. "You're going to need every dollar you can get. The world isn't kind to young women starting over with nothing." She pulled me into a hug, and I found myself clinging to her like a child, this near stranger who had shown me more kindness in 60 seconds than my family had shown in 25 years. When she pulled back, her eyes were glistening with tears. She kept hold of my arms, her gaze intense and urgent. "There's something you need to know," she said. "Your mother wasn't always this way. Before she married your father, she was ambitious, full of dreams. She wanted to be an architect. She had scholarships, plans, a whole future mapped out." I stared at her, unable to reconcile this description with the cold, complicit woman I knew. "She tried to leave once," Mrs. Patterson continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "When you were 3 years old, she packed bags for both of you in the middle of the night. I saw her loading the car, but your father caught her. He threatened to take both children and make sure she never saw either of you again. He had lawyer friends' connections money." She believed him, so she stayed. The snow fell around us, silent and relentless. "She stayed to protect you, Megan. She's been trapped ever since, and the woman she could have been died a little more each year. It doesn't excuse what she's done. But you should know she wasn't born cold. She was made that way." My entire understanding of my mother shifted in that moment, rearranging itself into a more complicated and painful picture. I didn't know what to do with this information, how to hold both her betrayal and her imprisonment in my mind at the same time. Mrs. Patterson glanced back at my parents' house, then leaned closer. "There's more. Your grandmother, your father's mother, she's the one who taught him that love must be earned, that only one child deserves it. She chose Emily before you were even born. She decided you were a mistake, a burden, and she made sure her son believed it too." I left Mrs. Patterson standing in the snow that night, her revelations echoing in my mind as I walked toward the bus station. My grandmother had chosen Emily before I was even born. My mother had tried to escape and failed. The cruelty I had experienced wasn't random. It was designed, inherited, passed down like a family heirloom of pain. But knowing the origins of my suffering didn't change what I had to do next: survive. The boarding house I found was located in a part of the city my family would never visit. The advertisement had promised affordable accommodations for working professionals, which turned out to mean a 10 by 12 room with peeling wallpaper, a radiator that clanked and hissed without producing much heat, and windows so drafty that frost formed on the inside during cold nights. The bathroom was shared with 6 other residents, and the walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbor's television through the plaster. It was perfect. For the first time in 25 years, I had a space that belonged entirely to me. No one criticized my choices here. No one compared me to Emily. No one looked through me as if I didn't exist. The freedom was intoxicating despite the poverty, perhaps even because of it. Every crack in the ceiling, every stain on the carpet, every draft that made me pull my blanket tighter represented something my family had never given me: independence. I unpacked my single suitcase and arranged my few possessions with care. On the small mirror above the dresser, I taped a note I had written on the bus ride over. 3 words in black marker: "You are enough." The first time I read those words aloud, they felt like a lie. A desperate, pathetic lie told by a desperate, pathetic woman who had nothing and no one. But I read them anyway every morning when I woke up, and every night before I fell asleep. I figured that if I said them enough times, maybe someday I would believe them. Survival required money, and money required work. Within 2 weeks of arriving, I had secured 3 jobs that together consumed nearly every waking hour of my day. From 8 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, I worked as a receptionist at a dental office. The pay was minimal, but it came with the dignity of a desk and a telephone and tasks that required thinking rather than just physical labor. I answered calls, scheduled appointments, and learned to smile at patients even when my feet ached and my eyes burned from exhaustion. From 3 until 9, I waitressed at a diner 6 blocks from the boarding house. The work was grueling, endless orders demanding customers' managers who watched the clock like hawks, but it came with one crucial benefit: food. The owner allowed staff to eat whatever remained at closing time, which meant I rarely had to spend money on dinner. Leftover meatloaf and day-old pie became my primary nutrition, eaten standing up in the kitchen before the long walk home. 3 nights a week from 11 until 5 in the morning, I cleaned offices in a downtown building. This was the hardest shift: vacuuming, endless cubicles, scrubbing bathrooms, emptying trash cans filled with the remnants of other people's productive days. But the solitude suited me. In the empty offices surrounded by the hum of fluorescent lights, I could think. I could plan. I could imagine a future different from my present. I slept 4 hours a night on the days I cleaned, slightly more on my days off. My body ached constantly: my back, my feet, my shoulders, my hands. I developed calluses I had never had before. I learned to function through exhaustion, to push past the point where my muscles screamed for rest. But something strange happened as the weeks turned into months. Despite the physical punishment, despite the poverty, despite the loneliness of building a life without a single person who cared whether I lived or died, my spirit grew stronger. Every dollar I saved felt like a small victory, money that no one could take from me or use against me. Every week I survived was proof that I could survive another. 6 months after leaving home, I decided to check my credit report. The fraudulent loan still haunted me, and I needed to understand exactly how much damage had been done before I could plan my financial recovery. I visited the public library, used one of their computers, and pulled up my credit file. The loan was there as I expected: $15,000 still largely unpaid, still destroying my score. But as I scrolled through the payment history, I noticed something strange. Someone had been making payments. Small amounts, $50 here, $75 there, deposited every month like clockwork. The payments had started exactly 1 month after I left home and continued without interruption. The money came from an account I didn't recognize, with no name attached that I could identify. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Who would pay down my fraudulent debt anonymously? I had no friends with money to spare. My family certainly wouldn't help. They were the ones who had created the debt in the first place. The payments weren't large enough to make a significant dent in the principal, but they were consistent, deliberate, intentional. Someone was watching out for me, someone I didn't know. I investigated as thoroughly as I could with limited resources. I called the bank and asked about the payment source, but they couldn't release that information without a court order. I searched public records for any account connected to my name. I even tried contacting a private investigator, but their fees were far beyond my means. Every lead hit a dead end. Eventually, I created a folder on the old laptop I had bought at a pawn shop. I labeled it Truth and began documenting everything: the original loan fraud, the evidence of my mother's co-signature, the mysterious payments, the patterns I was beginning to see. I didn't know why I felt compelled to keep these records. Something instinctive told me that these mysteries were connected, that someday the truth would matter. The secret payments continued for 5 years. Every month without fail, $50 to $100 appeared on my credit account. Slowly, painfully, my score began to recover. I started to think of my anonymous benefactor as a guardian angel, someone in the universe who believed I deserved better than what I had been given. Then, in March 2007, the payments stopped. I checked my credit report obsessively that month, then the next, then the next. Nothing. The mysterious deposits had ceased as abruptly as they had begun. I couldn't understand why until I received a letter from my father 3 weeks later. My mother had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. She had perhaps 6 months to live. I did not go to see my mother when I received news of her diagnosis. Perhaps that makes me cruel. Perhaps it makes me human. After everything she had done, co-signing the loan that destroyed my future standing silent, while my father dismantled my self-worth piece by piece, I could not find it in myself to rush to her bedside. The mysterious payments had stopped, and I wondered if she had been my anonymous benefactor all along. But wondering wasn't the same as forgiving, and I wasn't ready for either. Instead, I buried myself deeper in work and survival, in the slow construction of a life that belonged only to me. It was during this period, nearly 8 years after leaving home, that everything changed, not because of my family, but because of a 70-year-old security guard named Harold. I was working my overnight cleaning shift at the downtown office building when I encountered him struggling with the new digital check-in system the management had installed. Harold had worked security at that building for 15 years, but the sleek touchscreen interface might as well have been written in ancient Greek. His thick fingers jabbed at buttons that were far too small. Error messages appeared in fonts he couldn't read without squinting. When he made a mistake, the system offered no clear way to go back, just a confusing maze of menus that led him further from where he needed to be. His frustration was palpable. This was a man who had served in the military, raised 4 children, worked honest jobs his entire life. And here he was, defeated by a machine designed by someone who had never once considered that users might have arthritic hands or aging eyes, or simply a different relationship with technology. I set down my cleaning supplies and walked over. "Can I help?" Harold looked up, embarrassment and relief warring on his weathered face. "I've been trying to log my rounds for 20 minutes. Used to be I just wrote it in a book. Now they want everything digital and I can't make heads or tails of this thing." I guided him through the process, explaining each step, pointing out the tiny icons that were supposed to be intuitive but weren't. By the time we finished, I had identified at least a dozen design flaws that would frustrate anyone over 50, and that was just one simple program. That night, walking home through empty streets, I couldn't stop thinking about Harold. He wasn't stupid. He wasn't incompetent. He was simply being failed by technology that had been designed without him in mind. And he wasn't alone. I started paying attention everywhere I went. At the grocery store, I watched seniors struggle with self-checkout machines, their faces tight with confusion, as robotic voices barked instructions too quickly. At the pharmacy, I overheard elderly customers asking staff for help with the automated phone system that required pressing buttons in sequences too complicated to remember. At the bank, I saw a woman in her 70s leave in tears because she couldn't navigate the new digital-only account management, and no human teller was available. Millions of Americans over 55 were being systematically excluded from a world that was moving digital faster than anyone could adapt. Technology was supposed to make life easier, but for an entire generation, it was making life harder, and no one seemed to notice or care. I bought a cheap notebook from the dollar store and began sketching ideas. What if interfaces were designed with larger buttons that arthritic fingers could easily press? What if instructions were spoken aloud in clear, patient voices rather than displayed in tiny fonts? What if error messages offered gentle guidance instead of confusing dead ends? What if technology respected the intelligence of older users while accommodating the physical and cognitive changes that came with aging? I spent my lunch breaks at the public library reading everything I could find about user interface design, accessibility, and demographics. The statistics were staggering. The senior population was the fastest growing demographic in America. By 2030, 1 in 5 Americans would be over 65. Yet the tech industry remained obsessed with chasing younger users, leaving an enormous market completely ignored. Whoever solved this problem could build an empire. The idea consumed me. Every spare moment on the bus during slow hours at the dental office, in the quiet of the empty offices I cleaned, I was thinking, planning, designing. I taught myself basic coding from free online tutorials, staying up until 2 or 3 in the morning hunched over my secondhand laptop. I created rough prototypes on paper, sketching out interfaces that my grandmother could have used if she had lived to see the digital age. In my tiny boarding house room, surrounded by peeling wallpaper and the sound of radiators clanking, I built something from nothing. Not a company, not yet, but the foundation of an idea that felt bigger than anything I had ever imagined, bigger than my pain, bigger than my past, bigger than the family who had written me off before I ever had a chance to prove them wrong. The strange thing was, I never thought about my family during these late-night sessions. I wasn't building this to prove anything to them. Their opinions had stopped mattering years ago. I was building it because I saw a problem that no one else was solving, and I knew with a certainty I had never felt about anything that I could solve it. I started posting my ideas on online forums dedicated to senior technology issues. The responses were immediate and enthusiastic. People shared their own frustrations, their parents' struggles, their grandparents' isolation in an increasingly digital world. For the first time, I felt part of a community, not because of who my family was, but because of what I could contribute. One evening, after a particularly long shift at the diner, I checked my email on the library computer. Most messages were the usual forum notifications, but one stood out. The sender's address was unfamiliar. The subject line read simply, "Your ideas." I clicked it open, expecting spam, or perhaps another forum member with questions. Instead, I found a message that would alter the course of my entire life. I've been watching your posts on the Senior Tech Forum for several months now. Your ideas are brilliant, genuinely innovative, and deeply empathetic in ways that the tech industry desperately needs. I believe you're onto something that could help millions of people. I'd like to meet and discuss this further if you're willing. I think I can help. The message was signed with 2 initials, GW. I stared at those initials for 3 days before I gathered the courage to respond. GW could have been anyone, a scammer, a competitor trying to steal ideas, or simply someone who would waste my time with empty promises. I had learned long ago that hope was a dangerous thing, and I wasn't eager to have it crushed again. But something about the message felt different. The tone was respectful, without being patronizing, confident, without being arrogant. Whoever GW was, they had been paying attention. I wrote back a cautious reply agreeing to meet in a public place during daylight hours. The response came within an hour, suggesting a quiet cafe in a neighborhood I had never visited, the kind of area where people wore clothes that cost more than my monthly rent. The woman waiting for me at the corner table was not what I expected. Grace Whitmore was 68 years old, with silver hair cut in an elegant bob and sharp blue eyes that seemed to absorb everything around her without missing a single detail. She wore simple clothes, a cream blouse, tailored slacks, but everything about her radiated quiet authority. When she stood to shake my hand, her grip was firm and warm. "Megan Torres," she said, as if confirming something she already knew. "Thank you for coming. Please sit. I ordered coffee, but we can get you whatever you'd like." I sat across from her, clutching the folder of prototypes and notes I had brought, suddenly aware of how shabby my presentation must look compared to whatever sophisticated business plans she was accustomed to seeing. But Grace didn't seem to notice or care. Her attention was fixed entirely on me. "Tell me about your idea," she said simply. I talked for nearly an hour. I showed her my sketches, my research, my rough prototypes drawn on notebook paper and built from secondhand electronics. I explained the problem I had observed, the millions of Americans being left behind by technology, and the solutions I believed could help them. I talked about Harold the security guard and the woman crying at the bank, and my own observations at grocery stores and pharmacies across the city. Grace listened without interrupting, her eyes moving between my materials and my face. Occasionally, she asked probing questions that revealed both her expertise and her genuine interest. Where had I learned about interface design? What demographic research had informed my conclusions? How did I envision the business model scaling? Each question forced me to think deeper, articulate, better defend assumptions I hadn't even realized I was making. When I finally finished, slightly breathless and suddenly self-conscious about how much I had revealed, Grace sat back in her chair and studied me for a long moment. "You're remarkable," she said quietly. Do you know that what you've built here with no resources, no connections, no formal training would impress professionals with decades of experience and millions in funding? You have something rare, Megan, something that can't be taught. I didn't know how to respond. No one had ever called me remarkable. No one had ever suggested I possessed anything valuable at all. Grace must have sensed my discomfort because she smiled gently and changed direction. I should tell you who I am and why I reached out. My name is Grace Whitmore. In another life, I built and sold 3 technology companies before retiring, if you can call what I do retirement. Now I invest in founders that other people overlook. I look for talent that the mainstream misses. I had heard of Grace Whitmore, though I hadn't connected the name to the initials. She was a legend in tech circles, one of the few women who had built an empire in the early days of Silicon Valley. Her success story had been featured in business magazines I read at the library. But that's not the only reason I contacted you, Grace continued, and something in her voice shifted. I have a connection to your family, to your mother specifically. The cafe seemed to grow quieter around us. I set down my coffee cup, my hand suddenly unsteady. Catherine and I were college roommates, Grace said. More than that, we were best friends. We had dreams of starting a business together after graduation. She was brilliant, your mother. Creative, ambitious, full of ideas that were decades ahead of their time. I couldn't reconcile this description with the cold, complicit woman I had known. What happened? Grace's expression grew sad. She got pregnant at 21, with you. Her family pressured her into a quick marriage with your father, and gradually she disappeared from my life. I tried to reach her for years, letters, phone calls, visits that were always turned away at the door. Your father isolated her from everyone who might have encouraged her independence. Eventually, I had to accept that the Catherine I knew was gone. She paused, reaching into her bag to retrieve a folded piece of paper. Then about 8 years ago, I received this. It was the first and only communication from her in over 2 decades. She wrote to me just before she died. Grace handed me the letter. The handwriting was my mother's. I would have recognized it anywhere, even though I had so rarely seen it directed at me. The message was brief, the words clearly written by someone running out of time. Grace, I don't have much time. Cancer. Please, if you ever find my daughter Megan, look after her. She has everything I wasn't brave enough to use: courage, resilience, vision. She doesn't know it yet, but she's extraordinary. I failed her in so many ways, but perhaps you can help her in ways I never could. I've left her something, but it's not safe to explain in writing. Find her, Grace. Please. My hands trembled as I read the words over and over. My mother had called me extraordinary. My mother had asked someone to look after me. My mother had believed in me even if she had never found a way to show it. I've been searching for you ever since, Grace said softly. It took years to track you down. When I found your posts on that forum, I knew I had finally found Catherine's daughter. She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. I want to invest in your company. $250,000 to start. But more than money, Megan, I want to give you the answers you've been searching for your entire life. Then Grace slid an old envelope across the table. It was yellowed with age, sealed with tape that had dried and cracked over the years. Your mother sent this with her letter, Grace said. She told me you'd know what to do with it when the time was right. I've kept it sealed for 17 years, waiting for this moment. I held the envelope in my hands for a long moment before opening it. The paper was fragile with age, the tape brittle and cracking. Whatever was inside had been waiting for me for 17 years, a message from a woman I thought I knew, sent from beyond the grave, to a daughter she had failed in life. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. Inside, I found 2 items. The first was a small passbook from a savings account at a bank I didn't recognize. I opened it and scanned the entries, my breath catching as I understood what I was seeing. Deposits had been made regularly over the course of 20 years, small amounts, $20 here, $50 there, never enough to attract attention, but consistent enough to accumulate significantly. The final balance showed $47,000. The second item was a handwritten note on paper that had yellowed with time. My mother's careful script filled the page. My dearest Megan, if you're reading this, then Grace found you and I am gone. I want you to know that this money came from my mother's inheritance, your grandmother on my side, who died before you were born. Your father never knew it existed. I kept it hidden, saving what I could over the years, waiting for the right moment. I've been using part of it to pay down that loan they put in your name. I know about everything, Megan. I know what they did to you, and I know I was too weak to stop it. I'm sorry I couldn't do more. I'm sorry I couldn't be the mother you deserved. Use what remains to build the life you were always meant to have. I always believed in you, even when I couldn't show it. Even when I failed you in every way that mattered. You are extraordinary. You always were. With all my love, Mom. I sat in that cafe, tears streaming down my face, finally understanding the mystery of the secret payments. My mother had been my anonymous benefactor all along. She had been fighting for me in the only way she knew how, quietly and visibly from within the prison of her marriage. The payments had stopped when she got sick because she could no longer manage them. She had spent her final months ensuring that Grace would find me and continue what she had started. Grace sat quietly, giving me space to absorb what I had learned. When I finally looked up, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Your mother loved you, Megan. She just didn't know how to show it in a house that punished love. She wanted you to have what she never could, freedom, opportunity, a chance to become who you were meant to be. I wiped my eyes and looked at the passbook again. $47,000. Combined with Grace's investment, I had nearly $300,000, enough to turn my sketches and prototypes into a real company. Let's build something extraordinary, I said. Within 3 months, I had leased a small office space in a modest building downtown, nothing fancy but functional and ours. The space had good light, reliable internet, and enough room for a small team. I painted the walls myself on weekends, choosing warm colors that made the space feel welcoming rather than corporate. Hiring was both terrifying and exhilarating. I posted positions on job boards and received hundreds of applications, but I wasn't looking for the flashiest candidates with the most impressive resumes. I was looking for something else entirely. My first hire was David Chen, a 55-year-old programmer who had been laid off during a tech industry downsizing 2 years earlier. Despite decades of experience and expertise that younger developers couldn't match, no one would hire him. They said he was overqualified, or not a cultural fit, code words for too old. When I interviewed him, I saw someone who understood what it meant to be underestimated. My second hire was Maria Santos, a mother of 3 who was returning to work after 15 years of raising children. Her skills were supposedly outdated, her resume gap supposedly concerning. But when I talked to her, I found someone with extraordinary organizational abilities, fierce determination, and the kind of patience that comes from managing a household on a tight budget for over a decade. My third hire was Jasmine Wright, a young designer fresh out of school who had been rejected by every major firm for being too unconventional. Her portfolio was full of bold ideas that didn't fit neatly into corporate boxes. I saw someone who thought differently, exactly what we needed. Together we were a team of people who had been overlooked, dismissed, and written off. We understood our target users because we understood what it felt like to be invisible in a world that valued only certain kinds of success. I made a promise to myself and to them in this company, no one would be invisible. Every voice would matter. Grace became my mentor in ways I hadn't known I needed. She taught me everything business schools teach and everything they don't. How to negotiate contracts without being labeled difficult or emotional. How to command respect in rooms full of men who assumed I didn't belong there. How to read a room and identify who truly supported me versus who was simply waiting for me to fail. How to trust my instincts while remaining open to being wrong. I absorbed her knowledge like someone who had been starving for decades and was finally given food. Every lesson, every insight, every piece of hard-won wisdom, I devoured it all. Grace watched my transformation with an expression I couldn't quite read, satisfaction mixed with something sadder. "You remind me so much of Catherine," she told me one evening as we reviewed financial projections. "The way you think, the way you lead." She would have been exactly like this if she'd had the chance. I understood then that Grace wasn't just investing in my company. She was completing something that had been interrupted decades ago, a partnership between two ambitious women that my father's control had destroyed. In helping me succeed, she was honoring my mother's memory and proving that Catherine's potential hadn't been lost forever. It had simply been waiting for the next generation. 6 months after opening our office, we had a working prototype, a growing team, and a clear vision for the future. We were small but scrappy, underfunded but passionate. I was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could actually succeed. Then a letter arrived that changed everything. The envelope bore the seal of a government agency in Washington, D.C. I opened it with shaking hands and read the formal language inside. "We have reviewed your product demonstrations submitted through the Federal Innovation Portal. The Department of Health and Human Services would like to schedule a meeting to discuss potential applications for aging Americans. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience." The flight to Washington, D.C. was the longest 3 hours of my life. I reviewed my presentation materials, obsessively checking and rechecking every slide, every statistic, every demonstration video. Grace had coached me for weeks on what to expect: the formal atmosphere, the skeptical questions, the unspoken power dynamics that governed every government meeting. But nothing could fully prepare me for the weight of what was at stake. This was the most important meeting of my career. If I succeeded, my small company could reach millions of seniors who desperately needed our help. If I failed, I might never get another opportunity like this again. The Department of Health and Human Services headquarters was an imposing building of gray stone and endless corridors. Security guards checked my identification twice before directing me to a conference room on the 4th floor. When I arrived, 12 people were already seated around a long mahogany table. Officials in dark suits, aides with laptops open, and one elderly man whose title card identified him as an aide to a senator I recognized from the news. I set up my presentation with hands that only trembled slightly. Then I began to speak. I showed them the simplified tablet interfaces we had developed, large icons, clear labels, intuitive navigation that didn't require a manual to understand. I demonstrated our voice-guided medication reminder system, which spoke in calm, patient tones and allowed users to respond verbally rather than tapping tiny buttons. I presented our emergency response devices designed specifically for arthritic hands and aging eyes, with buttons large enough to press even when fingers didn't work the way they used to. But I didn't just talk about features and specifications. I talked about people. I told them about Harold, the security guard who couldn't log his rounds because the system wasn't designed for someone like him. I described the woman crying at the bank because digital-only options had made her feel stupid and obsolete. I spoke about the millions of Americans over 55 who were being systematically excluded from a world that was supposed to make life easier, not harder. "This isn't just about technology," I said, looking around the table at faces that had grown increasingly attentive. "It's about dignity. It's about respecting the intelligence and experience of people who built this country, raised families, and contributed to their communities for decades. They don't need us to dumb things down for them. They need us to design things with them in mind. There's a difference." The room was silent when I finished. For a terrible moment, I thought I had failed, that my passion had come across as unprofessional, that my personal stories had seemed irrelevant to bureaucrats who dealt in statistics and budgets. Then I noticed the elderly senator's aide. He was sitting very still, his eyes glistening, one hand pressed against his mouth. When he caught me looking, he gave a small nod that communicated everything words couldn't express. His mother, I learned later, had Parkinson's disease and struggled daily with technology that seemed designed to humiliate her. The questions that followed were sharp but fair. How would we scale production? What was our pricing model? How did we handle data security for vulnerable populations? I answered each one with the preparation Grace had drilled into me, but also with the genuine knowledge that came from years of observation and research. When the meeting ended 2 hours later, the lead official stood and extended her hand. "Ms. Torres, I've sat through hundreds of presentations from technology companies. Most of them talk about innovation and disruption without ever considering the human beings who will use their products. What you've shown us today is different. You understand our users because you actually see them as people. She proposed a pilot program. Our products would be tested in 50 senior centers nationwide, with full government funding for implementation and evaluation. If the results matched what she had seen today, they would recommend us for a federal initiative that could reach every senior center in America. I maintained my composure throughout the handshakes and formal goodbyes, through the security checkpoint and the taxi ride back to my hotel. It wasn't until I closed the door of my room and sat down on the edge of the bed that I allowed myself to feel the magnitude of what had just happened. My mind drifted unexpectedly to my family. I thought about the Christmas dinner 3 years earlier when my father had announced my unemployment to the entire table. I remembered Emily's smirk, my mother's averted eyes, the laughter that had rippled through the room at my expense. I imagined walking into that dining room now and telling them where I had just been, what I had just accomplished, who I was becoming. Then I dismissed the thought entirely. Their opinion had stopped mattering long ago. I wasn't building this company to prove anything to them. I was building it because millions of people needed what I could create. My family had no place in this story, not as motivation, not as audience, not as anything at all. I picked up my phone and called Grace. "How did it go?" she asked, her voice warm with anticipation. I tried to answer, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, something broke open inside me, a dam that had been holding back decades of pain, loneliness, and desperate hope. I began to cry. Not delicate tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere I had kept locked away for most of my life. Grace didn't try to stop me or offer empty comfort. She simply listened, understanding that these tears weren't just about today's success. They were about every rejection, every humiliation, every moment I had been told I would never amount to anything. They were about a mother who had believed in me secretly and a father who had dismissed me openly. They were about finally seeing proof that my worth wasn't determined by people who had refused to look. "You did it," Grace said softly, when my sobs finally quieted. "Catherine would be so proud." 1 week later, sitting in my small office, surrounded by the team I had built, I opened an email that made me read the sender's name 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Time Magazine. "We're featuring extraordinary women entrepreneurs for our Person of the Year issue," the message read. "Your work with senior technology has come to our attention through several government contacts. We'd like to interview you for a potential feature. Would you be available next month?" The Time Magazine interview was scheduled for 3 weeks out, giving me time to prepare for what would be the highest profile media exposure of my life. I spent my days coordinating the government pilot program and my evenings rehearsing answers to questions Grace anticipated the journalists might ask. Everything was moving faster than I had ever imagined possible. Then at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer anyway. A woman's voice, professional and somber, identified herself as a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital. Mrs. Dorothy Patterson had been admitted earlier that evening with heart failure. She was asking for me. I was out of bed and dressed within minutes. The drive to the hospital took 45 minutes that felt like hours. I ran through sterile corridors, following signs to the cardiac unit, my heart pounding with a fear I hadn't expected, and Mrs. Patterson was 90 years old. I had known this day would come eventually, but knowing something intellectually and facing it emotionally are entirely different things. She was the only connection to my childhood that didn't hurt, the only person from that world who had ever shown me kindness without condition. I found her room at the end of a quiet hallway. The lights were dimmed, machines beeping softly, the smell of antiseptic, and something sadder hanging in the air. She looked so small in that hospital bed, smaller than I remembered, diminished by age and illness. But when she saw me enter, her eyes lit up with a warmth that made me feel like I was coming home. "Megan?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but she smiled. "You came." I pulled a chair close to her bedside and took her frail hand in mine. Her skin was paper-thin, traced with blue veins, but her grip was surprisingly firm. "Of course I came," I said. "Why didn't you call me sooner? I could have helped. I could have—" She shook her head gently. "No fussing. I'm 90 years old. This is how it goes." She paused, gathering strength. "I watched the news last week. They mentioned your company, the government program. I always knew you'd rise, Megan. Your mother knew too." She reached under her pillow with her free hand fumbling for something hidden there. After a moment, she produced a small box worn cardboard held together with a rubber band that had lost most of its elasticity. She pressed it into my hands. "What is this?" "Letters," she said. "Letters your mother wrote to you over the years. Birthday cards, Christmas notes, little messages whenever she was proud of something you did. She wrote them and left them on the kitchen counter for your father to mail." Mrs. Patterson's expression darkened. "He destroyed them all. Every single one, threw them in the trash without telling her they never reached you." I stared at the box, unable to speak. "I saw him do it once through the window. After that, I started checking your family's trash. Whenever I found one of her letters, I saved it. I couldn't get them all. Sometimes he burned them, sometimes I missed the pickup, but I saved what I could." She squeezed my hand with surprising intensity. "Your mother wrote to you for your birthday every year, Megan, every Christmas. Every time she was proud of you and couldn't say it out loud. She loved you. She just didn't know how to show it in that house." I opened the box with trembling fingers. Inside were dozens of envelopes, some crumpled, some stained, all bearing my name in my mother's careful handwriting. I picked one at random, dated on my 16th birthday, and unfolded the paper inside. "My darling Megan," it began. "I'm sorry I can't give you the celebration you deserve. Your father insisted on a small family dinner, but I wanted you to have a party with friends and cake and everything a 16-year-old girl should have. Know that I love you more than my life allows me to show. You are brilliant and brave and so much stronger than you realize. Someday, you will escape this house and build something beautiful. I believe that with all my heart. Happy birthday, my extraordinary girl. Love always, Mom." The tears came before I could stop them. All those years I had thought my mother didn't care. All those years I had believed I was truly invisible to her, and she had been writing to me the entire time her love intercepted and destroyed by a man who wanted to control everything and everyone around him. Mrs. Patterson watched me cry with an expression of profound sadness. "There's more you need to know," she said, her voice growing weaker, "about why your father treated you the way he did." I wiped my eyes and leaned closer. "Your grandmother Robert's mother, she never forgave your mother for getting pregnant before marriage. She saw it as Catherine trapping her precious son. She decided before you were even born that you would never be accepted, that you would always be the reminder of your mother's sin." Mrs. Patterson paused to catch her breath. "Emily came later, planned proper. Your grandmother chose to love only her. She demanded that everyone in the family do the same." "But my grandmother died 20 years ago," I whispered. "And your father, weak as he is, never had the courage to defy her, not while she was alive and not after she was gone. The pattern just continued. He doesn't know how to be anything other than what she made him." Mrs. Patterson's eyes were closing, her strength fading. "I'm sorry, Megan. I should have told you sooner. I should have done more." "You did everything," I said, gripping her hand. "You saved these letters. You gave me $200 the night I left. You were the only one who saw me." She smiled faintly. "You were always worth seeing." Her breathing slowed. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. And sometime in the quiet hours before dawn, with her hands still in mine, Dorothy Patterson passed peacefully from this world. I sat with her until the nurses came. Then I gathered the box of letters and walked out into the cold morning air, carrying secrets that had been buried for decades. It wasn't until I got home and began reading through the letters more carefully that I found something that stopped my heart. Near the bottom of the pile, mixed among my mother's notes, was a letter that wasn't from her. It was addressed to her. The handwriting was younger, less refined, but unmistakably familiar. The date placed it 17 years before my grandmother's death, when Emily would have been 15 years old, and the opening line made my blood run cold. "Mom, I'll do what you asked. I'll sign Megan's name on the loan papers. Don't worry, she'll never find out. I'll make sure of it. Matt." I had kept Emily's letter hidden for 2 years, locked in a safe deposit box, along with the other evidence of my family's betrayal. The discovery had confirmed what I had long suspected. My mother hadn't just been complicit in the loan fraud. She had orchestrated it using her younger daughter as an instrument to destroy her older one. The woman who had written me secret birthday cards full of love had also plotted to steal my identity and my future. Human beings are complicated. I learned to hold both truths simultaneously. But now, standing in the hallway of my parents' house with my phone pressed to my ear, I felt the collision of my two worlds approaching like a freight train. The call from my COO was brief, a minor supplier issue that could wait until morning. I ended it quickly and stood for a moment in the quiet corridor, gathering myself for what was about to happen. From the dining room, I heard the television volume increase. Someone had changed the channel back to the Time magazine special. The commercial break was ending. I walked back to the doorway and stood there watching. The program returned with a dramatic flourish of music. The host appeared on screen, her expression serious and admiring. Welcome back to our special feature on women who built empires in silence. Our next story is perhaps the most remarkable of all, a woman who went from working 3 jobs just to survive to leading a technology revolution that serves millions of aging Americans. The screen filled with footage of my company's headquarters, then transitioned to images of seniors using our tablets, our medication systems, our emergency response devices. I watched my own face appear in the interview segment I had recorded months ago, speaking passionately about dignity and independence and the invisible population that technology had abandoned. And then the title card appeared, unmistakable and undeniable. Megan Torres, CEO and founder of Senior Tech Solutions. Company valuation $40 million. Users served over 2 million seniors nationwide. The dining room fell absolutely silent. I watched from the doorway as every head turned from the television screen to look at me. The transformation on their faces was almost theatrical confusion, giving way to recognition. Recognition to shock. Shock to something more complex and harder to name. My father dropped his wine glass. It hit the edge of the table and shattered, sending red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like a blood stain. He didn't move to clean it up. He just stared at the television, then at me, then back at the television, as if his brain couldn't process what his eyes were seeing. My mother gripped the edge of the table with both hands, her knuckles white, her face drained of color. She looked like someone who had just received news of a death, which in a way she had. The death of the narrative she had constructed the story of Megan, the failure that had allowed her to justify years of neglect and betrayal. Emily's reaction was the most fascinating to observe. Her face cycled through emotions like a slot machine, shock, disbelief, confusion, and then something darker settling into her features, fury mixed with humiliation. Just minutes ago, she had called me a failure in front of the entire family. Now the television was calling me a pioneer, a revolutionary, a $40 million success story. The relatives who had ignored me all evening suddenly couldn't stop staring. Cousin Jennifer's mouth hung open. Uncle Richard looked like he was doing math in his head, calculating exactly how much $40 million actually was. Aunt Patricia whispered something to her husband that I couldn't hear but could easily imagine. Only Aunt Margaret showed no surprise. The elderly woman sat calmly at her end of the table, a slight smile playing at the corners of her lips. She nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly, as if the television was simply confirming something she had known all along. Our eyes met across the room, and she raised her water glass in a subtle toast that no one else noticed. I walked back to my seat and sat down. The chaos continued around me, exclamations, questions, denials, the television still playing my interview in the background, but I felt strangely removed from all of it. I had imagined this moment countless times over the years. I had pictured their shocked faces, their stammered apologies, their sudden desperate interest in the daughter they had discarded. But now that it was happening, I felt surprisingly little. No triumph, no vindication, no satisfaction in watching their carefully constructed worldview shatter into pieces. Just a quiet confirmation of something I had known for a long time. Their opinions had never reflected my reality. They had been wrong about me my entire life, and their wrongness had said everything about them and nothing about me. My phone buzzed continuously in my pocket messages from my team, probably alerted by the broadcast sending congratulations and fielding media inquiries. The outside world was celebrating my success while my family sat frozen in their dining room, unable to reconcile the woman on television with the disappointment they had created in their minds. I picked up my glass of water and took a slow, deliberate sip. "You know," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos with its steadiness, "the turkey really is excellent this year." The absurdity of the comment, so mundane, so casual, so utterly disconnected from the earthquake that had just shaken their world, seemed to short-circuit something in the room. Conversations stopped. Exclamations died. Everyone stared at me with expressions that ranged from bewildered to almost frightened. Emily opened her mouth to speak, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. My mother made a small sound that might have been a sob or a gasp. And my father, Robert Torres, the man who had announced my unemployment to the entire family just an hour ago, the man who had told relatives I would never amount to anything, sat motionless in his chair. The color had drained completely from his face. His hands trembled slightly where they rested on the stained tablecloth. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Megan." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. "We need to talk. In private. Now." I looked at my father for a long moment before responding. The man who had spent decades dismissing me now wanted a private conversation. The man who had announced my unemployment to trigger family laughter now trembled at the revelation of my success. I could see the calculations happening behind his eyes, not remorse, not pride, but strategy. How could he manage this situation? How could he regain control? "Whatever you have to say," I replied calmly. "You can say it here. I have nothing to hide from the family." The words landed like a slap. My father's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, the transformation began. It happened so quickly that I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching for exactly this. Within minutes of the television revelation, the entire Torres family underwent a metamorphosis so dramatic it would have been comical if it weren't so pathetic. My father leaned toward me with an expression of warmth I had never seen directed at me before. "Megan, sweetheart, tell us about your company. How did all this happen? We had no idea you were working on something so impressive." His voice dripped with manufactured affection, as if we were close, as if he had ever once asked about my dreams or ambitions. My mother materialized at my elbow, fussing over my plate. "You've barely touched your food, dear. Are you eating enough? Are you sleeping well? Running a company must be so stressful. You look thin. Let me get you more mashed potatoes." She piled food onto my plate with trembling hands, her eyes glassy with what might have been tears, or might have been the desperate calculation of a woman realizing her meal ticket had been mistreated for 47 years. The performance was so transparent, so obviously motivated by self-interest, that I almost laughed out loud. They weren't even good actors. They had never needed to be because they had never wanted anything from me before. Now that I had something worth taking, they were scrambling to remember how affection was supposed to look. Relatives who had ignored me all evening suddenly crowded around with questions. Uncle Richard wanted to know about investment opportunities. Cousin Jennifer asked if my company was hiring. Aunt Patricia wondered if I could help her grandson get an internship. Each question was wrapped in a thin veneer of family interest, but the naked opportunism beneath was impossible to miss. I answered politely but briefly, watching their reactions with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing laboratory subjects. This was human nature stripped bare, the immediate pivot from contempt to flattery the moment power dynamics shifted. I had seen it before in business negotiations, in failed partnerships, in every situation where people's true motivations were revealed under pressure. But the most dramatic transformation belonged to Emily. My sister approached me slowly, her eyes glistening with tears that looked almost genuine. She reached out and took my hands in hers, the first voluntary physical contact between us in over a decade. "Megan," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I am so proud of you. I always knew you would do something amazing." The audacity took my breath away. "Remember how I used to encourage you? Emily continued, her performance escalating with each word. "I always told you that you had potential. I always believed in you even when things were hard. We're sisters. I've always been in your corner." I stared at her, genuinely fascinated by the scope of her revisionist history. This was the woman who had called me a failure in front of 23 relatives less than an hour ago. This was the woman who had forged my signature on a fraudulent loan when she was 15 years old. This was the woman who had spent our entire lives ensuring I knew my place beneath her, behind her invisible, next to her radiance. And now she stood before me, tears streaming down her perfectly contoured cheeks, claiming she had always been my champion. I noticed some of the relatives shifting uncomfortably. Several of them remembered exactly what Emily had said earlier that evening. The sneering dismissal, the casual cruelty, the confident declaration that I would never amount to anything. They had laughed along with her then. Now they avoided her eyes, perhaps recognizing their own complicity in the mirror of her performance. I gently extracted my hands from Emily's grip. "Thank you, Emily," I said, my voice neutral. "That's very kind of you to say." The words were meaningless, but they were also safe. I wasn't ready for confrontation, not here, not like this, surrounded by family members whose loyalties would shift with every new piece of information. I needed to understand what game was being played before I revealed my own cards. But even as I spoke these empty pleasantries, I recognized the pattern with perfect clarity. This sudden warmth wasn't love. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't even genuine surprise transformed into belated admiration. It was calculation, pure and simple. They were already imagining how to access my money, my connections, my success. The mental arithmetic was practically visible on their faces. Who could get the biggest loan, the best investment opportunity, the most advantageous position in my orbit? They saw me not as Megan, their daughter and sister and cousin, but as a resource that had suddenly become available. These people hadn't loved me when I had nothing. They wouldn't truly love me now that I had everything. They were incapable of that kind of love. They only knew how to love what they could take. This realization, which might have devastated a younger version of myself, instead brought a strange peace. My expectations finally matched reality. There was no hope left to be crushed, no illusion left to be shattered. I knew exactly who these people were, and I could respond accordingly. The evening continued with more performances, more questions, more transparent attempts to position for advantage. I played along just enough to avoid open conflict, giving nothing of substance while watching everything with careful attention. Then Emily cornered me by the fireplace. She glanced around to make sure no one was within earshot, then leaned close. Her tears were gone now, replaced by an expression of urgent intensity. "I need to talk to you alone," she whispered. "There are things about Mom, about what really happened with that loan, things you don't know." Her eyes searched my face desperately. "Please, Megan, it's not what you think. Let me explain before you do anything you can't take back." I followed Emily through the kitchen and out the side door into the garage. The space was cold, lit only by a single bare bulb that cast harsh shadows across my father's meticulously organized tools and my mother's holiday storage boxes. Our breath fogged in the December air. This was where Torres family secrets came to be buried, and apparently where they came to be exhumed. Emily turned to face me, and the tears began immediately. They flowed down her cheeks with theatrical precision, her lower lip trembling, her voice cracking with practiced vulnerability. "You have to understand," she began, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I was forced to sign your name on that loan. Mom and Dad made me do it. I was only 17. I didn't understand what it meant, what the consequences would be. They told me it was just paperwork, that it would help the family, that no one would ever know." She reached for my hands, but I stepped back. "I was a child, Megan. I didn't have a choice." I listened without speaking, my face carefully neutral. Emily had always been skilled at crafting narratives that positioned her as the victim, even in situations where she was clearly the perpetrator. I had watched her do it, our entire lives, break a vase and blame the cat, fail a test, and blame the teacher, destroy my future, and blame our parents. But this time, I had evidence. I reached into my purse and withdrew a folded piece of paper, a photocopy I had made of the letter Mrs. Patterson had saved. I unfolded it slowly, letting the moment stretch, then held it up so Emily could see her own handwriting. "Mom, I'll do what you asked," I read aloud. "I'll sign Megan's name on the loan papers. Don't worry, she'll never find out. I'll make sure of it." I looked up at my sister. "You wrote this when you were 15, Emily, 2 years before the loan was signed. This wasn't something you were forced into at the last minute. This was planned, and you volunteered." The transformation on Emily's face was remarkable. The performative tears stopped as if someone had turned off a faucet. Her expression cycled through shock, then fear, then the desperate calculation of someone realizing their lie has been exposed. For a long moment, she simply stared at the letter, her mouth opening and closing without producing sound. "Where did you get that?" she finally whispered. "It doesn't matter where I got it. What matters is that it exists. You weren't a helpless child following orders, Emily. You were a willing participant in destroying my future." The genuine panic that flooded her features was almost satisfying. Almost. But I had learned long ago that satisfaction from my family's suffering only perpetuated the cycle of pain. I wasn't here for revenge. I was here for truth. Emily pivoted to her next defense with the agility of someone who had spent a lifetime avoiding accountability. Okay, yes, I knew about the plan, but you don't understand what it was like for me." Fresh tears began to flow, real ones. This time I thought, though, with Emily it was always hard to tell. "You think being the favorite was easy? The pressure to be perfect, to always succeed, to never disappoint them? I lived in constant fear that if I failed at anything, they would treat me the way they treated you." She took a shaky breath, her voice rising with genuine emotion. "Every report card, every performance review, every relationship I had to be flawless. Because I saw what happened to people who weren't. I saw how they looked at you, talked about you, dismissed you, and I was terrified of becoming you." I listened to her words and recognized the truth buried within them. Emily had been damaged by our parents too, shaped by their conditional love into someone who could only value herself through achievement and comparison. The pressure of being the golden child carried its own burdens, its own wounds. But understanding someone's pain doesn't obligate you to let them keep hurting you. "I'm sorry you suffered, Emily," I said carefully. "I genuinely am. But your suffering doesn't excuse what you did to me. You had choices. You could have refused. You could have warned me. Instead, you participated willingly, and then spent the next 3 decades enjoying the advantages my destroyed credit helped provide." Emily's face contorted. "That's not fair. I was young. I didn't know." "You were young then," I interrupted. "What about now?" The question hung in the cold garage air. Emily's expression flickered with something I couldn't quite identify, guilt perhaps, or the knowledge that she was about to be caught in something she couldn't explain away. "What do you mean?" she asked, but her voice had gone flat. "I mean that someone opened 2 credit cards in my name 3 years ago. Someone used my Social Security number to rack up $37,000 in debt. Someone who apparently thought I would never become successful enough to check my credit report carefully." I watched her face as I spoke, seeing the confirmation in her widening eyes. "That was you, wasn't it?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "I was going through a divorce," Emily finally said, her voice barely audible. "Marcus had destroyed our finances, and I couldn't let the family know. I couldn't let them see me fail. I thought you would never find out. You were nobody. You were invisible. I never imagined you would become—" She gestured vaguely, unable to finish the sentence. "Rich," I supplied. "Successful. Someone who matters." Emily flinched but didn't deny it. "But now that you are," she continued, and I watched her shift into manipulation mode with the smoothness of long practice. "You could easily clear those debts. It's nothing to someone with $40 million. And then we could start fresh. We could finally be real sisters. I could help you introduce you to people, help you navigate the social circles you'll need for your business. We could be partners." I stared at her, marveling at the audacity. She had stolen my identity twice, confessed to ongoing felony fraud, and was now proposing a business partnership. The last thread of hope I had held for this relationship, a thread I hadn't even known still existed, finally snapped. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen. The voice recording app had been running since we entered the garage. "I've been recording this conversation, Emily. In New Jersey, single-party consent is legal. I only need my own permission to record." I watched the blood drain from her face. "And what you just confessed to is ongoing felony identity theft. The credit cards were opened 3 years ago. That's well within the statute of limitations for criminal prosecution." Emily's face went white when she saw the recording. For a moment, I thought she might faint or scream or launch herself at my phone. Instead, she simply stood there trembling as the full weight of her exposure settled over her like a shroud. I left her in that cold garage without another word. I walked back through the house, collected my coat, and departed the Torres family Christmas dinner without saying goodbye to anyone. Several relatives called after me, suddenly concerned, suddenly interested, but I didn't stop. I had what I needed. The drive back to my apartment took 3 hours through light holiday traffic. I spent most of it in silence, processing what had happened and planning my next moves. By the time I pulled into my parking garage, I had made a decision, before taking any action I needed, to understand the full scope of what my family had done. 2 days after Christmas, I sat in a conference room with my attorney, Richard Chen, and a forensic accountant named Patricia Williams. Both came highly recommended by Grace, and both had cleared their schedules when I explained the situation. The documents spread across the table between us told a story worse than anything I had imagined. Patricia spoke first, her voice clinical and precise. "We've conducted a comprehensive review of your credit history, Ms. Torres, going back to your 18th birthday. What we've found is a pattern of identity theft spanning over 2 decades. She slid a summary sheet toward me. Beyond the original loan in 1995 and the credit cards opened 3 years ago, we've identified 5 additional instances of your identity being used without authorization." I stared at the list, my stomach turning. In 1998, a cell phone account was opened in your name and left unpaid, resulting in a collection action. In 2003, someone used your Social Security number for a utility deposit that was never returned. In 2008, an application for rental housing was submitted. Using your identity, it was denied due to your damaged credit, but the hard inquiry further impacted your score. Patricia paused, her expression grim. "And in the past year, since your company's success became public, there have been 2 attempts to access your business accounts using personal information only a family member would know. Both were blocked by your security protocols, but the attempts are documented." I sat back in my chair, struggling to absorb what I was hearing. My family hadn't just betrayed me once in a moment of financial desperation. They had been parasites feeding on my identity for my entire adult life. Every time I had struggled to rebuild my credit to qualify for apartments to establish financial stability, they had been actively undermining me from the shadows. Richard Chen. My attorney spoke next. His tone was measured, but I could see something like excitement in his eyes, the gleam of a litigator who has just been handed a case with overwhelming evidence. "Here's where we stand legally," he said. "The original loan fraud from 1995 is outside the statute of limitations for criminal prosecution. That window closed long ago. However, the credit cards Emily opened 3 years ago are well within the time frame. Combined with your recorded confession, we have an airtight case for felony identity theft charges." He flipped to another page in his legal pad. "Beyond criminal charges, you have grounds for civil suits against multiple family members. Your parents conspired in the original fraud and likely in subsequent incidents. Emily has confessed to ongoing crimes. The documented damages, lost educational opportunities, denied housing, damaged credit, affecting employment prospects, could support a substantial judgment." "How substantial?" I asked. "Conservatively, several $100,000, aggressively pursued potentially more, especially given the emotional distress component and the pattern of behavior over decades." Richard leaned forward. "Ms. Torres, I've practiced law for 30 years, and I rarely see cases this clear-cut. You could send your sister to prison. You could financially destroy your parents through civil liability. The evidence is overwhelming." The words hung in the air between us. Prison, financial destruction, overwhelming evidence. I had the power to demolish my family completely. The thought should have been satisfying after everything they had done. Instead, I felt the weight of the decision pressing down on me like a physical force. That evening, I met Grace at her townhouse. She poured tea and listened as I recounted everything: the discoveries, the legal options, the magnitude of what I could do if I chose to pursue it. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You know," she finally said, "justice isn't the same as revenge. They sound similar, and sometimes they look similar, but they come from different places inside us." She set down her teacup and looked at me with the wisdom of someone who had navigated decades of complicated decisions. "You have every right to protect yourself and ensure they can never hurt you again. But you also have the right to choose how much of your life you want to spend fighting the past." "I don't know what I want," I admitted. "Part of me wants to watch them suffer the way they made me suffer, but another part of me just wants to be free of them entirely. I didn't build my company for revenge. I built it for freedom." Grace nodded. "Then let that guide you. Whatever you decide, make sure it serves your freedom, not your anger. Anger will chain you to them forever. Freedom means they no longer have power over your choices." I asked for time to think. Richard agreed to hold off on any filings until I made a decision. I needed to find a path that protected my future without trapping me in an endless war with my past. But before I could decide anything, my past decided to come for me first. The certified letter arrived 3 days later, delivered to my office by a courier who required my signature. The envelope bore the letterhead of a law firm I didn't recognize, Morrison & Associates, with offices in Newark. I opened it with a sense of foreboding that proved entirely justified. The letter informed me that Robert and Linda Torres, along with Emily Torres Mitchell, had retained legal counsel regarding matters of familial business interests and intellectual property. They were asserting that I had developed the foundational concepts for my company while living under their roof, using resources they had provided, and therefore they were entitled to a significant share of my business success. They were threatening to sue me, claiming they owned a piece of everything I had built. I read the letter 3 times, certain I must be misunderstanding something. But the language was clear, the claims explicit, the audacity breathtaking in its scope. My family was asserting that because I had lived in their home until the age of 25, any intellectual property I developed was partially theirs. They claimed that the nurturing environment they provided, the resources they made available, and the foundational support of family life had directly contributed to my business success. Therefore, they argued they were entitled to compensation, a percentage of my company's value that their attorney had helpfully calculated at $15 million. $15 million. For a family that had stolen my identity, destroyed my credit, and spent decades telling me I would never amount to anything. I sat in my office staring at the letter, trying to process the sheer disconnect between their claims and reality. The nurturing environment had been one of constant criticism and deliberate neglect. The resources they provided had been the bare minimum required by law, food, shelter, nothing more. The foundational support had consisted of using my identity to fund Emily's education while ensuring I could never afford my own. And now they wanted $15 million because I had managed to succeed despite everything they did to destroy me. The audacity revealed something important they still didn't understand. They still saw me as the invisible daughter, the family disappointment, someone who could be bullied and manipulated and shamed into compliance. They had watched my face appear on Time magazine, learned that I had built a $40 million company, and their first instinct was not pride or even grudging respect. It was to figure out how to take what I had earned. They had learned nothing. They would never learn. I brought the letter to Richard Chen the following morning. He read it once, then again, and then he did something I hadn't expected from my serious, measured attorney. He laughed. "This is what we call a nuisance suit," he said, still chuckling as he set the letter down. "It's designed to intimidate, not to win. The legal theory is absurd. No court in the country would uphold a claim that parents own their adult child's intellectual property simply because that child once lived at home. There's no contract, no agreement, no consideration exchanged. It's completely frivolous. Then why send it? Because they're hoping you'll pay them off to make it go away. They're betting that you'd rather write a check than deal with the publicity of a lawsuit, even one they can't win. Richard leaned back in his chair, his expression sharpening. What they don't realize is that by escalating to legal threats, they've given us the perfect opportunity to respond with overwhelming force. He pulled out a legal pad and began outlining a strategy. Here's what I recommend. We counter with a detailed letter outlining every crime committed against you, the original loan fraud, the ongoing identity theft, the attempted access to your business accounts. We attach the recorded confession, the letter Emily wrote at 15, and the forensic accountant's report documenting 2 decades of financial parasitism. And then we make our position crystal clear. We inform them that if they don't withdraw their frivolous claim within 30 days and sign legally binding documents promising no future contact or claims you will pursue criminal prosecution to the fullest extent of the law. We'll file a criminal referral with the district attorney's office. We'll pursue civil damages that will financially destroy them, and we'll ensure that every piece of evidence becomes part of the public record. I considered his words carefully. This was the moment I had been avoiding the point of no return. Once we sent that letter, there would be no more ambiguity, no more possibility of quiet resolution. It would be war. But hadn't it always been war? Hadn't my family been attacking me since before I was born, choosing Emily as the worthy child and designating me as the sacrifice? The only difference now was that I finally had weapons to fight back. "Do it," I said. "Send the letter." Richard nodded with visible satisfaction. "I'll have it drafted by end of business today. We'll send it certified mail return receipt requested, so there's no question they received it." The letter that went out the following morning was 12 pages long, dense with legal citations and documented evidence. It laid out the complete history of my family's crimes against me in clinical, devastating detail. It included copies of the forged loan documents, the recorded confession, Emily's handwritten letter from age 15, and the forensic accountant's comprehensive report. The conclusion was unambiguous. The Torres family had 30 days to withdraw their claim-signed documents, releasing all future claims against me or my business, and agree to cease all contact. Failure to comply would result in criminal referral civil litigation and the full exposure of their conduct to public scrutiny. I didn't bluff. I never had. And now my family would learn what it meant to face someone who had spent a lifetime being underestimated and was done accepting it. The ball was in their court. For the first time in 47 years, they were the ones without power, without control, without the ability to dictate the terms of our relationship. Everything they had done to me was documented, evidenced, and ready to be deployed. I expected a legal response, perhaps a withdrawal of their claim, perhaps a desperate attempt to negotiate. What I received instead, 5 days later, was a text message from a number I hadn't seen in years. My mother. The message was brief, but each word carried weight I couldn't ignore. "Please, before you destroy this family, give us one dinner to explain everything. You don't know the full truth, Megan. None of us do. There are things I've never told anyone, things I should have told you years ago. I'm dying. The cancer came back, and the doctors say I have weeks, maybe less. Let me tell you everything before it's too late. One dinner, that's all I ask. Then you can do whatever you think is right." I stared at my mother's text for a long time before responding. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to proceed with the legal strategy, and let the courts deliver the justice my family had evaded for decades. But another part of me, a part I thought I had buried long ago, needed answers. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but understanding. Why had the people who were supposed to love me chosen instead to destroy me? I agreed to the dinner. Grace advised caution. Richard advised bringing a witness. I chose to go alone, armed only with my briefcase and the evidence it contained. Whatever happened in that house, I wanted to face it on my own terms, as the woman I had become, rather than the ghost I had been. The drive to my parents' home felt different this time. The familiar streets, the manicured lawns, the houses decorated with winter lights, all of it seemed smaller somehow, less imposing than the landscape of my childhood memories. I had spent so many years feeling diminished by this place. Now I saw it for what it was, just a house, just a neighborhood, just the setting for a story that no longer defined me. I pulled into the driveway at exactly 7 o'clock. The windows glowed with warm light, but there were no extra cars, no signs of the extended family that usually filled every Torres gathering. My mother had kept her word this would be immediate family only. I walked to the front door carrying my leather briefcase, my expression carefully neutral. I had practiced this in the mirror, schooling my features into the calm mask I had learned to wear in high-stakes business negotiations. Whatever emotions churned beneath the surface, I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. My father opened the door. He looked older than he had at Christmas, as if the past few weeks had aged him years. His usual commanding presence seemed diminished, his shoulders slightly hunched, his eyes unable to quite meet mine. He attempted a smile that faltered before it fully formed. "Megan, thank you for coming." His voice wavered on my name. "Please come in." I stepped into the house where I had spent 25 years being invisible. The living room had been arranged formally, 4 chairs positioned around the coffee table, like a conference room rather than a family gathering. My mother sat in one chair, wrapped in a shawl, despite the warmth of the room, her skin pale and papery, her eyes red-rimmed. The cancer had progressed visibly since Christmas. She looked like someone who was already halfway to wherever the dying go. Emily occupied another chair, her posture rigid, her gaze fixed firmly on the carpet. She hadn't looked at me when I entered and showed no signs of planning to start. I took the seat across from my mother, placing my briefcase on the floor beside me. My father settled into the remaining chair, completing the square. For a long moment, no one spoke. My father cleared his throat and attempted to seize control of the conversation, falling back on patterns that had served him for decades. "Let's put business aside," he began, his voice straining for the authoritative tone I remembered from childhood. "We're family. Whatever legal matters exist between us, surely we can handle them privately without courts and lawyers getting involved." He leaned forward, trying to project warmth he had never genuinely felt. "You've done well, Megan. Better than any of us expected. We're proud of what you've accomplished." Proud. The word hung in the air like a bad joke. "But family doesn't sue family," he continued. "Whatever misunderstandings have occurred, whatever mistakes were made in the past, we can work through them together. That's what families do." I let the silence stretch after he finished watching him squirm in the absence of my response. Then I reached down and opened my briefcase. "Before we discuss family," I said, my voice calm and level, "let's discuss crimes." I removed the first folder and placed it on the coffee table. This is the original loan document from 1995, $15,000 taken out in my name with a forged signature that doesn't match my handwriting. I placed a second folder beside it. This is a letter written by Emily when she was 15 years old, volunteering to sign my name on the loan paperwork. A third folder. These are records documenting every instance of identity theft committed against me over the past 3 decades. The cell phone account, the utility deposit, the rental application, the credit cards Emily opened 3 years ago. A fourth folder. And this is a transcript of the recorded confession Emily made to me in the garage on Christmas night, admitting to ongoing felony identity theft within the statute of limitations. Each document landed on the table like a verdict, the evidence of their betrayal laid out in neat, organized stacks. My father's face had gone gray. Emily seemed to shrink into her chair, her eyes still fixed on the carpet. Only my mother looked directly at me, tears streaming silently down her hollow cheeks. "You wanted to discuss family," I said. "Let's discuss the family that stole my identity to fund Emily's education. Let's discuss the family that destroyed my credit so thoroughly I couldn't get student loans, apartments, or decent jobs for over a decade. Let's discuss the family that continued to parasitize my identity, even after I left, assuming I would stay invisible forever." The room was absolutely silent. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked steadily, marking seconds that felt like hours. Then my mother spoke. "Your grandmother, your father's mother, she never accepted you." Her voice was barely above a whisper, cracked with illness and emotion. "She called you a trap baby. She said I got pregnant on purpose to force Robert into marriage, and she never forgave either of us for it." She paused to catch her breath, the effort of speaking clearly exhausting her. "She demanded I prove my worth by favoring Emily, the legitimate grandchild, conceived within marriage, planned and proper. She said if I didn't, she would convince Robert to divorce me and take both children. I would never see either of you again." My mother's eyes met mine, pleading for understanding. I wasn't sure I could give. "Your father was too weak to protect you from her, and I was too broken to leave. I tried once when you were 3. I packed bags for both of us, but he found out and threatened exactly what his mother had promised. He would keep both children and make sure I never saw you again. So I stayed. I stayed to stay near you." She reached toward me with a trembling hand. "It doesn't excuse anything. I know that. But you should know you were always loved, Megan, even when I couldn't show it, even when I failed you in every way that mattered." The confession hung in the air between us, incomplete absolution seeking acceptance it could not receive. I looked at my dying mother, this woman who had written me secret birthday letters and co-signed fraudulent loans, who had tried to escape and then participated in my destruction, and I asked the question that had burned in me for 20 years. "If you loved me," I said quietly, "why did you let Emily use my name for that loan? Why did you co-sign the document that destroyed my future?" My mother's face crumpled, at my question tears flowing freely now, her frail body shaking with the effort of confronting a truth she had buried for nearly 3 decades. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for an answer that could never be adequate, but might at least be honest. "Because your father gave me no choice," she whispered, her voice breaking on each word. "And I was too afraid to fight him." She clutched her shawl tighter, as if the fabric could somehow protect her from the weight of her own confession. "We were in financial trouble that year. Robert's practice was struggling, bills were piling up, and Emily's tuition was due. When I suggested we tell Emily she would have to defer enrollment for a year, your father refused. His mother had just died, but her expectations lived on. Emily was the golden child, the only grandchild who mattered. She had to have the best no matter the cost." My mother's eyes met mine, pleading for understanding, even as she admitted the unforgivable. "He said we would use your identity for the loan. When I protested, he threatened what he always threatened: divorce custody of both children, making sure I never saw either of you again. I believed him. I had always believed him. So I chose the option that let me stay near you, even if I had to hurt you to do it." She reached toward me again, her hand trembling in the air between us. "I thought sacrificing your credit was better than losing you entirely. I told myself you were young, you would recover, you would never have to know. I told myself so many lies to survive what I was doing." A sob escaped her. "I was wrong. I was wrong about everything. And I have spent every day since then trying to make it right in small ways. You would never see the payments on your debt, the letters you never received, the prayers that somehow you would find your way, despite what we had done." I listened to her explanation, heard the genuine anguish beneath every word, and felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness that was too much to ask, perhaps too much to ever give, but something like understanding. My mother had been trapped in her own prison, making impossible choices between terrible options, sacrificing one daughter to stay near both. It was cowardly. It was wrong. But it was also human in a way I could recognize, even if I could never condone. Understanding, however, is not absolution. The wound was real regardless of intent. My destroyed credit, my lost opportunities, my decades of struggle, none of that disappeared because my mother had been afraid. "I hear you," I said quietly. "I understand the position you were in. But understanding why you hurt me doesn't undo the hurt. You made a choice and I paid the price. That's the truth, no matter how much pain surrounds it." My mother nodded, accepting this verdict with the resignation of someone who had already judged herself more harshly than anyone else could. Then my father spoke, and whatever fragile moment of honesty had existed in the room shattered instantly. "You have to understand the circumstances." He began, his voice taking on the defensive tone I remembered from every childhood argument I had ever lost. The pressure I was under, the expectations, the financial situation. My mother had just passed, and everyone was looking to me to maintain the family's standing. "You don't know what I was going through." He gestured at the documents still spread across the coffee table. Yes, mistakes were made, but we were all doing the best we could with what we had. You can't hold people accountable for decisions made under duress. You can't expect perfection from— "Stop!" The word came out of my mouth with a force that surprised even me. My father fell silent, his mouth still open, his excuse hanging unfinished in the air. "You're right," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I don't know your struggles. I don't know what it was like to be you carrying your mother's expectations and your financial pressures and whatever other burdens you've convinced yourself justify what you did." I stood looking down at him for the first time in my life, not physically, but in every way that mattered. "But I know you had choices. You always had choices. You could have chosen to treat both your daughters equally. You could have chosen to tell your mother that her demands were cruel and wrong. You could have chosen to find another way to pay for Emily's education that didn't involve destroying my future." My father opened his mouth to interrupt, but I continued, my voice rising. "Instead, you consistently chose to sacrifice me. Not because you had to, because it was easier. Because you calculated that I wouldn't fight back. Because you thought I would stay small and silent and invisible forever, accepting whatever scraps you decided to throw my way." I gathered the folders from the coffee table and placed them back in my briefcase, each movement deliberate and final. "You were wrong." The click of the briefcase closing echoed in the silent room. "I'm not going to sue you," I said, and I saw relief flash across Emily's face before I continued. "Not because you deserve mercy, not because I've forgiven you, but because I'm not going to spend my life pursuing people who don't matter. You've taken enough of my years, my energy, my peace. You don't get any more." I looked at each of them in turn, my father still grasping for authority he no longer possessed, my mother weeping silently into her shawl, Emily finally meeting my eyes with an expression I couldn't read. "We're done," I said. "Not because I hate you. Hate would mean you still have power over me. We're done because I choose peace, and peace requires distance from people who only want what I can give them. You didn't love me when I had nothing. You tried to exploit me the moment I had something. That tells me everything I need to know about what I mean to this family." I walked toward the front door, my footsteps steady on the hardwood floors I had once tiptoed across, afraid to make noise, afraid to take up space. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Whatever they were feeling, whatever they might say, it no longer had the power to change my course. The December air hit my face as I stepped onto the porch, cold and clean and liberating. I had done what I came to do. I had faced them with evidence of their crimes and refused to let their explanations diminish my truth. For the first time in 47 years, I had ended a family encounter on my own terms. I was halfway to my car when I heard the front door bang open behind me. "Megan, wait!" Emily's voice cut through the quiet night, shrill with desperation. I turned to see her running across the lawn in her stockinged feet, her face contorted with an expression that had moved beyond fear into something uglier. "If you abandon us now, I'll tell the press everything," she screamed loud enough for any neighbor to hear. "I'll destroy your reputation. I'll tell them you stole the company idea from Dad. I'll say you're a fraud, that you built everything on lies." She stopped a few feet from me, panting, her eyes wild with the desperation of someone watching their last leverage slip away. "You think you're so much better than us? You think you can just walk away? I'll make sure everyone knows who you really are." I looked at my sister, standing on the frozen lawn, her face twisted with fury, her threats echoing through the quiet suburban night. For a moment, I felt something I hadn't expected, not anger, not fear, but a profound sadness for the person she had become. Emily had spent her entire life building her identity on being superior to me. Now that foundation had crumbled, and she was grasping at anything that might restore the hierarchy she needed to feel whole. "Do whatever you feel you need to do, Emily," I said quietly. I won't stop you, but I won't respond to it either. The truth has a way of emerging no matter how many lies are told to bury it. I got in my car and drove away, leaving her standing in the cold, screaming threats that grew fainter with distance until they disappeared entirely. Emily followed through on her promise. Within 48 hours, a tabloid website published an interview with my sister containing accusations designed to destroy everything I had built. According to Emily's account, I had stolen the foundational concept for senior tech solutions from my father, who had been developing similar ideas for years. She claimed I had abandoned my dying mother to pursue wealth and fame. She painted a picture of me as a cold, calculating opportunist who had turned my back on the family that raised me the moment I no longer needed them. The story spread with the viral velocity that only scandal can achieve. Social media filled with speculation and doubt. Business reporters who had praised my innovation now questioned my integrity. My PR team flooded my phone with urgent messages recommending immediate response press releases, interviews, legal threats against the tabloid. I told them to wait. Grace called that evening, her voice calm, despite the chaos erupting around my reputation. "Are you sure about this strategy?" she asked. "Every hour you stay silent, the narrative embeds deeper." "I'm sure," I replied. "The truth has its own momentum. We just have to trust it." For 24 hours, I watched the storm rage without responding. It was one of the hardest things I had ever done. Harder than working 3 jobs, harder than building a company from nothing, harder than walking out of my family's house. Every instinct screamed at me to fight back, to defend myself, to counter Emily's lies with the mountain of evidence I possessed. But I had learned something important in my years of business. Sometimes the most powerful statement is silence. When you respond to accusations, you legitimize them. When you let truth emerge on its own, it carries a weight that no press release can match. The truth began emerging on the second day. It started with Dorothy Patterson's daughter, Margaret, now in her early 60s. She had seen the tabloid story and recognized it immediately as the lies it was. She contacted a journalist at the New Jersey Star-Ledger with something far more compelling than Emily's accusations: the box of letters her mother had saved, along with photographs documenting years of Megan's mistreatment. Pictures of me working in the grocery store while Emily's graduation party happened at home. Letters my mother had written and my father had destroyed. Documentation of a pattern that spanned decades. Then former neighbors came forward. The Hendersons, who had lived across the street, remembered watching me leave for my overnight cleaning job while Emily's car sat in the driveway unused. The Martinellis recalled overhearing my father berate me in the backyard, telling me I would never amount to anything. Mrs. Chen shared memories of finding me crying on the curb after family dinners, too ashamed to go back inside and too broke to go anywhere else. A former colleague of my father's, recently retired and no longer bound by professional loyalty, gave an interview revealing that Robert Torres had often bragged about keeping Megan in her place and ensuring she understood her role in the family hierarchy. He recalled specific conversations where my father laughed about my failed job applications, attributing them to my own incompetence rather than the credit destruction he had engineered. But the most damaging revelation came from within the family itself. A distant cousin, someone I barely remembered from childhood, released screenshots of a family group text that had been active for years. The messages documented a pattern of mockery and dismissal that was impossible to deny. Relatives joking about my unemployment, Emily sharing screenshots of my social media posts with mocking commentary, my father making cruel predictions about my future that others laughed at and amplified. Most devastating of all messages from the hours immediately before the Christmas dinner revelation, when relatives had been texting each other about how pathetic I looked and how amusing it would be to watch Emily put me in my place again. The contrast between these private messages and Emily's public claims of family love was stark and undeniable. Investigative journalists, sensing a deeper story, began digging into the Torres family finances. What they found confirmed everything I had documented: the forged loan, the identity theft, the pattern of financial exploitation spanning decades. Emily's own bankruptcy filings became public record, revealing the credit card fraud that had driven her desperate attempt to destroy me. The police report I had filed about the recent identity theft added legal weight to the mounting evidence. The narrative flipped completely within 72 hours. Emily's tabloid interview, which had initially seemed damaging, became evidence of her willingness to lie when cornered. The Torres family transformed from sympathetic victims of a cold daughter into a cautionary tale about toxic family dynamics and financial abuse. Think pieces appeared about the hidden epidemic of family identity theft. Support groups for survivors of similar abuse saw their membership spike. Through it all, I maintained my silence about the family. I gave no interviews about Emily's accusations or my parents' behavior. I issued a single statement through my company's communications team. I remain focused on our mission of serving aging Americans with dignity and respect. I have no comment on personal family matters and ask that the media respect the privacy of all involved. The restraint was intentional. Every time I refused to engage it highlighted the contrast between my behavior and Emily's increasingly desperate public statements. My silence spoke louder than any rebuttal could have. I focused on running my company meeting with investors overseeing the government pilot program expansion. I let the truth defend me while I built the future I had earned. Then, on a gray Tuesday morning, my attorney called with news that changed everything. The district attorney's office in Newark has opened a formal investigation into identity theft allegations against Emily Torres, Richard said. They've obtained a copy of your recorded confession from the Christmas confrontation. It became part of the public record through the media coverage. They're moving forward with charges regardless of your participation. I didn't file a criminal complaint, I said. You don't have to. Identity theft is a crime against the state. Once evidence becomes public, prosecutors can act independently. Richard paused. Megan, your sister is likely going to be arrested. The news of Emily's impending arrest spread through the media within hours. I watched from the quiet of my office as the story evolved from tabloid scandal to genuine legal consequences. Part of me felt vindicated finally after decades of exploitation. Someone in my family would face real accountability. But another part felt hollow, uncertain whether this outcome was justice or simply another form of destruction in a family that had never known how to do anything else. 3 days after Richard's call, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. My team had been screening calls from journalists and curiosity seekers for weeks. But something made me pick up. Megan. Emily's voice was barely recognizable. The polished confidence, the sneering superiority, the performative warmth, all of it was gone. What remained sounded broken, hollowed out the voice of someone who had finally run out of masks to wear. Please don't hang up, please. I didn't hang up. I waited. I lost my job yesterday. Marcus filed for divorce when everything came out about the debts, the fraud, the lies I told him about our finances. She laughed bitterly. Turns out he didn't know about most of it. 20 years of marriage and he didn't know who he was really married to. Her voice cracked. My lawyer says I'm facing up to 5 years. Prison, Megan. Real prison. I listened without responding, uncertain what she wanted from me. I'm not calling to ask for money, Emily continued, anticipating my suspicion. I'm not calling to ask you to help with the legal case. I know you won't, and I don't deserve it anyway. She took a shaky breath. I just want to talk. Once. To explain, or try to explain, why I became what I became. You're going to hate me forever anyway, but I want you to at least understand. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at Riverside Park, a small green space in our old neighborhood where we had played as children before the family dynamics calcified into their final cruel shape. I remembered building sandcastles in the sandbox with Emily when she was 4 and I was 7 before our grandmother decided which of us deserved love and which deserved to be sacrificed. Before our parents chose sides. Before we became whatever we had become. Emily was sitting on a bench when I arrived, wrapped in a coat that had seen better days. She looked older than her 44 years, her face drawn, her hair unwashed, her designer clothes replaced by something that might have come from a thrift store. The golden child had tarnished completely. I sat beside her, leaving space between us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The winter wind rustled through bare branches overhead. Children played on the distant playground, their laughter carrying across the cold air. I was terrified of being you, Emily finally said, her voice quiet. My whole life, every single day. I turned to look at her, surprised by the admission. Not because you were worse than me, she continued, her eyes fixed on the playground, but because being you meant being invisible. It meant being dismissed, mocked, treated like you didn't matter. I watched how they treated you, and I was so scared that if I ever failed, if I ever stopped being perfect, I would become you. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Grandma made it clear from the beginning. She told me stories about you, how you were the reason Mom had to get married, how you ruined Mom's dreams, how everything would have been better if you'd never been born. She said I was the real Torres child, the legitimate one, and that my job was to prove the family was worth something despite your existence. I listened, feeling something shift in my understanding of my sister. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but something like recognition. When I was cruel to you, Emily said, it wasn't because I enjoyed it. Well, maybe sometimes I did, but mostly it was because every time I put you down, I felt safer. I was proving I wasn't you. I was showing them I was still the favorite, still valuable, still worth loving. She finally turned to face me. I know that's sick. I know it makes me a monster, but it's the truth. You were a child, I said slowly. A child shaped by the same toxic system that shaped me. Yes. Hope flickered in Emily's eyes. But then you grew up, I continued, and you kept making the same choices. Every time you forged my signature, mocked me at family dinners, tried to destroy my reputation, those were adult choices. You could have stopped at any point. You could have apologized, made amends, chosen differently. You didn't. Emily's face crumpled. I know. I was dealt the same bad hand, Emily. The same family, the same grandmother, the same parents who divided their love unfairly. But I chose differently. I chose to build rather than destroy. I chose to escape rather than exploit. Those were my choices, and these were yours. I paused, gathering my thoughts. I can feel sorry for the child you were, the little girl who was terrified of becoming invisible. That child deserved better, but I can also hold the adult you became accountable for what she did. Both things are true at the same time. Emily nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. Will you testify against me at the trial? I won't testify against you, and I won't advocate for maximum punishment. But I also won't help with your legal fees or speak in your defense. You'll face the consequences of your choices, whatever those turn out to be. I stood from the bench looking down at my sister, this woman who had tormented me for decades, who had tried to destroy everything I built, who had been both perpetrator and victim of the same family sickness. I hope you find healing, Emily. I genuinely do. Not for my sake, but for yours. Being consumed by fear and cruelty is its own kind of prison, whether or not you end up in a physical one. I turned to walk away. Megan, wait. Emily's voice stopped me. I looked back. She was standing now, her expression strange, guilty, defiant, desperate. There's something else you should know, something I've never told anyone. I waited. Mom didn't just co-sign that first loan. She's the one who came up with the entire plan. Dad was against it at first. He thought it was too risky that you might find out. But Mom convinced him. She said you were the expendable one, that your credit didn't matter because you'd never amount to anything anyway. Emily's words hit me like a physical blow. Mom wasn't Dad's victim in this. She used you to save the family from bankruptcy, and she let Dad take most of the blame so she could keep playing the suffering wife. She was never the helpless prisoner she pretended to be. I walked away from Emily in the park, her final revelation echoing in my mind. My mother, the woman who had written secret birthday letters, who had made anonymous payments on my debt, who had wept and begged for understanding, had been the architect of my destruction all along. The carefully constructed narrative of her as a helpless victim trapped by my father's cruelty crumbled with Emily's words. My mother had used me as a financial sacrifice and then spent decades performing the role of reluctant accomplice to obscure her own culpability. I drove home in silence, processing this final betrayal. Strangely, it didn't devastate me the way earlier revelations had. Perhaps I had finally exhausted my capacity for shock where my family was concerned. Perhaps I had already let go of the mother I wished I'd had and accepted the mother I actually got. Either way, the information settled into place like the final piece of a puzzle I had been assembling my entire life. The picture was complete now, and it was uglier than I had ever imagined, but at least it was clear. The criminal case against Emily moved forward with the grim efficiency of a legal system that had been handed overwhelming evidence. The prosecution assembled their case methodically. The recorded confession from Christmas night, the documentary trail of identity theft, spanning years' testimony from the forensic accountant who had mapped every fraudulent transaction. Emily's public defender attempted to negotiate, but there was little leverage to be found when your client had confessed on tape. In the end, Emily pleaded guilty to 2 counts of identity theft, avoiding trial on the multiple felony charges that could have sent her to prison for a decade. The judge, noting her lack of prior criminal record and apparent remorse, sentenced her to 18 months probation, 200 hours of community service, and a restitution order requiring full repayment of all fraudulent debts, nearly $40,000 that she had no way to pay. Her professional certifications in financial planning were permanently revoked. The career she had built over 2 decades evaporated overnight. The golden child who was supposed to carry the Torres family legacy into the next generation was now a convicted felon, her name permanently associated with fraud and betrayal in every background check she would ever face. I did not attend the sentencing hearing. I learned the outcome from Richard Chen, who called with a detailed summary and a question I had been expecting. "Your parents," he said. "Do you want to proceed with civil action?" I had thought about this for weeks, wrestling with the implications. Criminal charges against my parents were not viable. The original loan fraud was too old, and their involvement in Emily's recent crimes was difficult to prove beyond conspiracy. But civil court operated on a different standard, and the evidence we had assembled was damning. "Yes," I said, "file the suit." The civil case against Robert and Linda Torres alleged fraud, conspiracy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We sought damages for the original loan, the subsequent identity theft incidents, and the decades of financial impact their actions had caused. Richard's team calculated the total at just over $130,000, a conservative estimate that would be difficult to dispute. My parents' attorney attempted to negotiate a dismissal, claiming financial hardship and health concerns. When that failed, they proposed a settlement of $20,000, which Richard rejected without consulting me. The evidence was too strong, the damages too clear. We would accept nothing less than full accountability. Faced with the choice between a public trial that would expose every detail of their conduct or a settlement that would end the matter privately, my parents chose settlement. The final amount was $127,000, roughly the total financial damage they had caused me over the years, adjusted for interest and compounded impact. They didn't have that kind of money in liquid assets. To pay the settlement, they had to sell the family home. I received this news with a strange mixture of emotions. The house where I had grown up, where I had been humiliated every Christmas, where I had packed my single suitcase and walked out into the December snow, that house was now someone else's property. The Torres family would scatter to apartments and rental units, the physical center of their cruelty finally dissolved. I had thought I might feel triumphant. Instead, I felt something closer to exhaustion. The legal battles were over. The consequences had been delivered. Justice, such as it was, had been served. But I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel vindication. I felt the emptiness that comes when a long fight finally ends and you realize that winning doesn't restore what was lost. My childhood was still gone. My opportunities were still missed. The decades I spent struggling could never be recovered. What I could do was ensure that my pain served a purpose beyond my own story. I donated $50,000 from the civil settlement, nearly half of what I received to establish the Patterson Fund for Family Fraud Victims. Named in honor of the woman who had saved my mother's letters and shown me kindness when no one else would, the fund would provide legal assistance and financial counseling to adults who had been victimized by identity theft perpetrated by family members. It was a more common problem than most people realized. Across America, parents used children's Social Security numbers to open credit accounts. Siblings forged signatures on loans, spouses ran up debts in partners' names. The shame and family pressure surrounding these crimes kept most victims silent, trapped between the desire for justice and the fear of destroying family relationships. I had been one of those silent victims for decades. Now I could help others find their voices. Grace came to my office the day I signed the foundation paperwork. She stood in the doorway watching as I reviewed the documents that would turn my trauma into someone else's lifeline. "Catherine would be proud," she said quietly, "not just of your success, but of this, taking your pain and transforming it into something that helps others." I looked up at her, this woman who had known my mother before everything went wrong, who had carried a letter for 17 years, waiting to deliver it. "Do you think she really loved me?" I asked. Even after what Emily told me about the loan being her idea. Grace was silent for a moment. "I think your mother was a complicated woman who made terrible choices. I think she loved you and hurt you at the same time. I think she spent years trying to atone in secret for sins she couldn't publicly admit." She paused. "I think people can be both monsters and martyrs, often in the same breath." It wasn't the clean answer I wanted, but it was the honest one. 2 weeks later, my phone rang with a call from New York. The voice on the other end was professional, excited, slightly breathless. "Ms. Torres, this is Jennifer Walsh from Time magazine. We'd like to extend an extraordinary invitation. Our editorial board has selected you as our Person of the Year, the first entrepreneur in the senior technology category to receive this honor. We'd like you to accept the award at a nationally televised ceremony next month and deliver a keynote address about your journey." She paused. "Will you speak publicly about how you built your empire from nothing?" I said yes to Time magazine without hesitation. After everything I had survived, after everything I had built, I was not going to shrink from the recognition I had earned. But as the reality of what I had agreed to sank in over the following days, I found myself wrestling with questions I hadn't anticipated. The formal invitation arrived by courier 3 days after the phone call, a thick cream envelope containing details of the ceremony, the cover photo shoot, the interview schedule, and the keynote address I would be expected to deliver. The event would be broadcast live from New York to an audience of millions. My face would appear on newsstands across America. My words would be quoted, analyzed, remembered. What exactly did I want those words to say? My PR team assembled within hours of the invitation's arrival, eager to craft the narrative that would accompany my public coronation. They were skilled professionals who understood media dynamics, brand positioning, and the delicate art of revealing just enough to seem authentic while protecting against liability and backlash. Their first draft of talking points was polished, professional, and utterly hollow. "We recommend emphasizing the business innovation angle," Sarah, my communications director, explained as she walked me through the document. "Your journey from working multiple jobs to building a $40 million company. The senior technology market insights. The government partnership." We mention family challenges and personal obstacles without getting into specifics that could invite legal complications or tabloid follow-up. I read through the talking points, each one carefully constructed to suggest depth without actually containing any. Overcame significant personal challenges. Drew strength from difficult experiences. Learned resilience through adversity. The words were true in the most technical sense, but they felt like lies of omission. "What if I want to tell the real story?" I asked. Sarah exchanged glances with the rest of the team. "We'd advise caution, Megan. The legal situation with your family is still sensitive. Anything you say publicly could be used in appeals or future litigation. And frankly, the audience for Person of the Year ceremonies expects inspiration, not trauma." I understood her concerns. They were valid, practical, rooted in genuine expertise about how media narratives could spin out of control. But something about the sanitized version felt wrong, like I would be accepting an award for surviving a fire while pretending the fire had been a minor inconvenience. That evening, I met Grace at her townhouse. She poured wine and listened as I explained my dilemma, her sharp eyes watching me work through thoughts I hadn't fully formed. "What are you afraid of?" she asked when I finished. The question caught me off guard. "I'm not afraid. I'm just trying to figure out the right approach." "You're afraid," Grace said gently, "and that's okay, but you need to understand what you're afraid of before you can decide what to do." I sat with the question, letting it penetrate past my defenses. What was I afraid of? "I'm afraid that if I tell the truth, people will see me as a victim," I finally admitted. "I've spent my whole life being dismissed and pitied. I don't want my greatest moment of recognition to be overshadowed by sympathy for what was done to me." Grace nodded slowly. "And if you don't tell the truth, then I'm still hiding, still pretending, still letting my family's shame dictate what I can and can't say." I set down my wine glass. "I built my company by solving problems no one else would acknowledge. I can't stand on that stage and refuse to acknowledge my own." "Your story matters," Grace said, leaning forward with an intensity that reminded me why she had built empires. "Not despite the pain, but because of it. Millions of women have been dismissed, stolen from, and abandoned by people who should have loved them. They need to see someone who survived and thrived, not a polished version, not a sanitized highlight reel, but the real struggle in all its ugliness." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Think about the women who use your products. 70-year-old widows whose children never call. 65-year-old grandmothers whose families think they're too old to matter. 55-year-old women trapped in marriages where they feel invisible. They need to see someone who knows what that invisibility feels like and who built something extraordinary anyway." I thought about the user testimonials that came into our office every week. Women who wrote to thank us for technology that made them feel capable rather than helpless. Men who expressed gratitude for products that respected their dignity. Seniors who said our company was the first one that had ever really seen them. They had been invisible too. They understood. "If I tell the truth," I said slowly, "I don't want it to be about revenge. I don't want to stand on that stage and publicly humiliate my family even if they deserve it." "Then don't," Grace replied simply. "Tell your truth without telling their names. Focus on the universal experience being underestimated, finding your own worth, building something meaningful despite opposition. Make it about hope, not hatred. Make it about everyone who's ever been told they're not enough." I drove home that night with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. I knew what I needed to do. I began writing my speech the next morning, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a legal pad. I wrote in longhand, the same way I had sketched my first product designs in a cheap notebook years ago before I had investors or employees or offices. There was something honest about pen on paper, something that stripped away the polish and left only the essential truth. The words flowed because they had been waiting inside me for decades. I wrote about growing up feeling invisible in my own home, about being told explicitly and implicitly that I would never amount to anything, about watching opportunities go to others while I was expected to sacrifice without complaint. I didn't name my family, didn't provide details that would identify them specifically, but I didn't hide the reality either. I wrote about leaving with $200 and a single suitcase, about working 3 jobs simultaneously, about sleeping 4 hours a night and eating leftover diner food, about the years of rebuilding credit that had been destroyed by people who were supposed to protect me, about learning to believe in my own worth when no one else did. I wrote about Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor who had saved letters and pressed money into my hand when I had nothing, about Grace, the mentor who had appeared when I was ready to receive her wisdom, about the team I had built from people others overlooked, the laid-off programmer, the returning mother, the unconventional designer, about discovering that the invisible people often see the most clearly. And I wrote about the seniors we served, the millions of Americans over 55 who had been abandoned by technology designed without them in mind, the grandmothers and grandfathers who deserved dignity and independence, not condescension and neglect. The simple revolutionary act of building something that said, "You matter," to people who had been told they didn't. The speech took 3 days to write, filling page after page of legal pad, with words I revised and refined until they felt true. My PR team reviewed it with nervous expressions, concerned about the personal revelations, but ultimately agreed that it was powerful precisely because it was honest. "This is going to resonate," Sarah admitted. "It's risky, but it's real. That's rare." 3 days before the ceremony, as I was reviewing the final draft in my apartment, a letter arrived by regular mail. The envelope bore no return address, but I recognized the handwriting, immediately shaky, now weakened by illness, but unmistakably my mother's. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper containing a single line, written in the careful script of someone who had measured every word. "I'm proud of you. I'm sorry. I won't be here much longer. Please don't let our failures define your victory." I read my mother's letter a dozen times in the days before the ceremony. Each reading revealed something different. Sometimes I saw manipulation, a dying woman's attempt to absolve herself without truly reckoning with what she had done. Other times I saw genuine love twisted and broken, but real nonetheless. Most often, I simply saw complexity, the irreducible messiness of human relationships that refused to sort themselves into neat categories of villain and victim. I didn't respond to the letter. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said, or that would make any difference now. My mother was dying, and I was about to stand on a national stage and tell a version of our story to millions of people. Whatever reconciliation might have been possible between us had been foreclosed by decades of choices, hers and mine both. We would each have to find our own peace. The night of the ceremony arrived with the surreal quality of a dream. A car service picked me up from my hotel at 6 o'clock, navigating through Manhattan traffic toward the venue where Time magazine had hosted its Person of the Year celebration for decades. I wore a simple, elegant dress in deep blue. Grace had helped me choose it, insisting that simplicity communicated more confidence than flash. My hair was styled simply, my makeup minimal. I wanted to look like myself, not like someone trying to be someone else. The red carpet was overwhelming in its intensity. Photographers shouted my name, a sound I was still not accustomed to hearing. Cameras flashed in a continuous strobe as I walked the gauntlet of press, smiling calmly despite the anxiety churning beneath my composed exterior. Other honorees moved through the same ritual, a senator known for healthcare reform, a climate scientist whose research had influenced global policy, a young actress who had used her platform to advocate for mental health awareness. We nodded at each other in passing, fellow travelers in the strange land of public recognition. But I heard the whispers as I walked. I saw the glances, the phones raised to capture photos, the buzz of excitement that seemed to center on me more than the others. That's her, the one who built the senior tech company. She started with nothing, literally nothing. Did you read about her family, the things they did to her? The story had spread far beyond the tabloid scandal Emily had tried to create. Investigative journalism, public records, and the simple power of a compelling narrative had transformed my journey into something that resonated with millions of people who had never heard of me before. I was no longer just a successful entrepreneur. I was a symbol of something larger, survival resilience, the possibility of building a beautiful life from broken foundations. The ceremony itself was held in a grand ballroom that had hosted presidents and celebrities and cultural icons for generations. I sat at a reserved table near the stage, flanked by Grace on one side and my COO David Chen on the other. The program moved through honoree after honoree, each receiving their moment of recognition, each delivering brief remarks that were broadcast live to households across America. When my segment began, the lights dimmed and a video package played on the massive screens flanking the stage. I watched my own face appear, interview clips interspersed with footage of our products in action. Seniors using tablets with interfaces I had designed. Elderly hands pressing emergency response buttons. I had engineered faces lighting up with the dignity of independence my company had helped restore. The announcer's voice narrated over the images, recounting statistics that still felt unreal when applied to my life. Senior Tech Solutions Company valuation, $40 million. Seniors served over 2 million nationwide. Jobs created 340 with an average employee age of 52. Government partnerships spanning 50 states. Then the tone shifted, the announcer's voice dropping into something more personal. But the numbers only tell part of the story. Megan Torres started with $200 and a single suitcase after walking away from everyone who had underestimated her. Tonight, she shares her journey for the first time. The applause that greeted me as I walked to the podium was thunderous, but I barely heard it. My focus had narrowed to the speech cards in my hand, the microphone in front of me, the millions of invisible faces watching from living rooms and hospitals and nursing homes across America. I looked out at the audience and began to speak. There was a day, many years ago, when I decided that my worth would no longer be determined by people who refused to see me. The room fell silent, the quality of attention shifting from polite interest to something deeper. I grew up feeling invisible in my own home. The people who were supposed to love me looked through me as if I wasn't there, or worse, saw me only as someone to be compared unfavorably to others. I was told in words and in actions that I would never amount to anything, that I was a disappointment, that I didn't have what it takes. I paused, letting the words settle. I believed them for a very long time. When you hear something often enough from people whose opinions are supposed to matter, it becomes the voice in your own head. It becomes the lens through which you see every opportunity and every failure. I described leaving home with nothing but $200 pressed into my hand by a kind neighbor, the single suitcase containing everything I owned the cold December night when I walked away from everything familiar and stepped into complete uncertainty. I talked about working 3 jobs simultaneously, about sleeping 4 hours a night, about eating leftover food, and teaching myself to code in public libraries because I couldn't afford classes or computers. But here's what I learned in those years of struggle. I said, my voice growing stronger. The people who told me I was nothing were wrong. Not because I proved them wrong by succeeding, though I did. They were wrong because my worth was never theirs to determine in the first place. I am not valuable because I built a company. I was valuable all along. I just needed to stop letting others define what that value looked like. I spoke about the seniors we serve, the millions of Americans over 55 who had been abandoned by an industry obsessed with youth. I described the grandmother who couldn't use her smartphone because the buttons were designed by 25-year-olds who had never considered arthritic fingers. The grandfather who felt stupid trying to navigate automated phone systems that assumed technical knowledge he didn't have. The widow who wept with relief when our tablet let her video call her grandchildren without needing a manual. We built something that says you matter to people who have been told they don't, I said. And I understood their experience because I had lived it. Being invisible isn't just lonely, it's dehumanizing. It makes you question whether you have any right to take up space in the world. Our technology doesn't just help seniors complete tasks. It tells them every time they use it that someone was thinking about them. Someone cared enough to design something with them in mind. I reached the part of my speech I had wrestled with most. I forgive those who hurt me, I said slowly, the words I had chosen with such care. Not because they deserve it. Forgiveness isn't about deserving. I forgive them because I deserve peace. Because carrying anger and resentment is its own kind of prison, and I have already spent too many years imprisoned by other people's limitations. I choose to be free. I choose to let go of what was done to me and focus on what I can still do for others. The applause began before I finished speaking, building from scattered clapping to a roar that filled the ballroom. I saw people standing, tears streaming down faces I didn't recognize, hands reaching toward me as if I had given voice to their own unspoken pain. Somewhere across the country, in a small rented apartment that was all they could afford after selling the family home, my father sat in silence watching the broadcast. His face was unreadable, but his hands trembled slightly where they rested on his knees. In a halfway house where she was completing her probation requirements, Emily watched on a communal television, surrounded by other women paying for their own mistakes. She didn't speak, but tears ran down her cheeks. And in a hospice bed, my mother watched through half-closed eyes, her breath shallow, her time nearly gone. When I spoke the words about forgiveness, she closed her eyes and mouthed silently, "Thank you." It was the closest to reconciliation we would ever come. I left the stage to thunderous applause that seemed to follow me back to my table, where Grace embraced me with tears in her eyes, and David shook my hand with wordless emotion. My phone had been silenced for the ceremony, but as I sat down, I felt it vibrate insistently in my clutch. An urgent message from Richard Chen. My attorney, major development. The inheritance your mother mentioned in her letter, it was real. And it's larger than anyone knew. Call me immediately. I stepped outside the ballroom to return Richard's call, my mind still spinning from the intensity of the ceremony. The corridor was quieter here, muffled applause and music filtering through the walls as the celebration continued without me. Whatever this was about, Richard's message had carried an urgency that couldn't wait. He answered on the first ring. "Megan, thank you for calling back so quickly. I apologize for interrupting your evening, but this couldn't wait. What's happening?" I received a call 2 hours ago from an estate attorney in Pennsylvania named Harold Morrison. He represents a trust that was established over 50 years ago by your maternal grandmother, Elizabeth Warren Torres. Richard paused, letting the name register. Your mother's mother. I leaned against the wall, trying to process. I never knew my grandmother. She died before I was born. That's correct. But she left behind something significant. I heard papers shuffling on Richard's end. Elizabeth Torres was a successful businesswoman in her own right. She owned and operated a small chain of women's clothing stores in the Philadelphia area during the 50s and 60s. When she passed, her estate was substantial for the time. The majority was supposed to pass to your mother, Catherine, and then to any children Catherine might have. Supposed to? Richard's voice tightened. This is where it gets complicated. According to Harold Morrison's research, your father somehow gained control of most of the inheritance after marrying your mother. The details are murky. Your mother may have signed documents she didn't fully understand, or your father may have manipulated the legal structure through his law practice connections. Either way, over the course of 40 years, he depleted the majority of the funds. I closed my eyes, absorbing another layer of betrayal. My father hadn't just stolen my identity, he had stolen my mother's inheritance too. He had consumed everything he touched. However, Richard continued, a portion of the original estate was protected in a separate trust that your father couldn't access directly. This trust was specifically designated for Elizabeth's grandchildren to be released upon the death of your mother or when the grandchildren reached age 50, whichever came first. How much? I asked. The remaining trust principal is $340,000 plus accumulated interest. Harold Morrison has confirmed that you are the sole legitimate beneficiary. Emily's involvement in documented fraud against you disqualifies her under the trust's moral character clause. Richard paused. Megan, this money has been waiting for you for nearly 50 years. Your grandmother set it aside specifically so that her grandchildren would have something no matter what else might happen. And I stood in that quiet corridor trying to reconcile this news with everything I thought I knew about my family. A grandmother I had never met, dead before I was born, had somehow reached across the decades to protect me. She had anticipated, or perhaps simply feared, that her daughter's future might be uncertain, and she had built a shelter that not even my father's greed could entirely demolish. There's more, Richard said. Harold Morrison also delivered a letter. Your mother sent it through hospice care 3 days ago, with instructions that it be given to you only after the trust information was revealed. I had it couriered to your hotel. It should be waiting when you return. The letter was indeed waiting at the front desk in a manila envelope marked with Harold Morrison's law firm address. I took it to my room and sat on the bed for a long time before opening it, staring at my mother's handwriting on the inner envelope, the same shaky script I had seen in her previous letter. When I finally broke the seal, several pages fell out written in a hand that grew progressively weaker as the letter continued, as if my mother had been racing against her own fading strength. My dearest Megan, it began, by the time you read this, you will know about your grandmother Elizabeth's trust. I have wanted to tell you about it for years, but the timing never seemed right, and then my illness progressed faster than anyone expected. So I am writing what I should have said in person, hoping these words reach you before I am gone. Your grandmother loved the idea of you before you were born. When I told her I was pregnant, she cried with joy. She said she had always dreamed of grandchildren, of watching her legacy continue through another generation. She set up that trust specifically to ensure you would have something of your own, something no husband could control, no misfortune could steal. She wanted you to have the independence she had fought so hard to achieve in an era when women weren't supposed to want such things. She died 3 months before you were born, a heart attack sudden and unfair. I have always believed she would have protected you if she had lived. She would have seen what your father was and what he was doing to us. She would have helped me leave. But she was gone, and I was alone, and I made choices I will regret for whatever time I have left. Your father took control of most of the inheritance shortly after we married. I didn't understand what I was signing. I was young, grieving, desperate to believe he would take care of everything. By the time I realized what he had done, it was too late to undo it. But I discovered that the grandchildren's trust was separate, protected by language my mother's attorney had insisted upon. Your father couldn't touch it directly. I used my access to that trust to make the payments on your fraudulent debt. It wasn't much, $50 here, $100 there, but it was something. It was the only way I could fight back without him knowing. I told myself it would make a difference, that someday you would understand I tried to help, even when I couldn't help openly. I was complicit in your suffering, Megan. Nothing I say can change that. I participated in the loan that destroyed your credit. I stood silent while your father diminished you year after year. I failed you in every way a mother can fail a child. But I tried to fight back in small ways, hidden ways, the only ways I knew. Perhaps that is not enough. Perhaps it is nothing at all. But it is the truth. The woman you are becoming is the woman your grandmother and I both dreamed you would be. Strong, independent, successful, compassionate despite everything that should have made you bitter. When I saw you on television speaking about forgiveness and peace, I wept. Not because I deserve your forgiveness, but because you found the strength to offer it anyway. The money from the trust is yours. It is not tainted by your father's cruelty or my weakness. It is pure, your grandmother's love, preserved across 5 decades waiting for you. Please take it. Please use it to build something beautiful, the way you have built everything else in your life. I love you. I have always loved you, even when my love looked like abandonment and my protection looked like silence. Your mother, Catherine. I sat with the letter for hours, reading and rereading, until I had memorized every word. The complexity of my mother's legacy refused to resolve into simple categories. She had hurt me and tried to help me. She had participated in my destruction and secretly worked toward my salvation. She had loved me in broken, inadequate ways that were still somehow love. Grace came to my hotel room the next morning, alerted by my silence at the post-ceremony celebration. I showed her the letter and explained the inheritance, watching her face as she absorbed the implications. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I don't know. Part of me wants to reject it, to prove that I don't need anything from my family, that I built everything myself." "You did build everything yourself," Grace said firmly. "The company, the reputation, the success, none of that came from your family. This money is different. It's not from the people who hurt you. It's from a grandmother who hoped for you, and a mother who salvaged what she could from her own wreckage. Taking it honors their efforts, not the abuse." I thought about my grandmother Elizabeth, a businesswoman in the 1950s, fighting for independence in an era that demanded women be dependent. I thought about my mother trapped in a marriage that consumed everything good about her, still finding small ways to resist. I'll take it, I decided, but not for myself. I established the Elizabeth Warren Torres Foundation for New Beginnings the following week, funding it with the entire $340,000 inheritance plus matching funds from my own accounts. The foundation would provide scholarships for first-generation college students, particularly those from difficult family backgrounds, young people who, like me, had to build their futures without the support systems others took for granted. It felt right. My grandmother's money, preserved for 50 years, would now help dozens of young people escape circumstances that might otherwise have trapped them. The legacy of 2 women who had dreamed of more for me would ripple outward, touching lives they would never know. 1 week after the foundation's establishment, my phone rang with a call from hospice. My mother had passed away peacefully in her sleep, holding a copy of Time magazine with my face on the cover. The funeral was held on a gray Tuesday morning at a small chapel my mother had attended sporadically throughout her life. The service was quiet, sparsely attended a handful of distant relatives, a few neighbors, the kind of gathering that happens when a life has been lived mostly in isolation. I sat in the back row watching the other mourners navigate their discomfort around me. No one knew how to behave. The family scandal had been too public, the dynamics too exposed. They offered condolences with averted eyes and escaped as quickly as politeness allowed. Emily was there, subdued and sober, completing her community service hours by helping set up chairs before the service. She looked older than her 44 years, the consequences of her choices etched into her face. We didn't speak, but our eyes met once across the chapel. She nodded slightly. I nodded back. It was acknowledgement without reconciliation, recognition that we had both survived the same wreckage, even if we had survived it differently. My father sat alone in the front row, diminished in a way I had never seen before. The commanding presence that had dominated my childhood had collapsed into something smaller, frailer. He had lost his wife, his home, his reputation, and both his daughters in the span of a single year. I felt no satisfaction watching his defeat, only a distant sadness for a man who had never learned that love couldn't be controlled or rationed. I didn't speak at the service. I had said everything I needed to say while my mother was alive, and the words I hadn't said could no longer reach her. But when the time came for final goodbyes, I approached the casket and placed something inside a copy of my grandmother Elizabeth's trust document, the paper that proved across 3 generations the women of this family had tried to protect each other, even when the world made it nearly impossible. What my mother couldn't do openly, she had done in secret. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. 1 month later, I stood on a stage at the National Women's Business Conference facing an audience of 3,000 entrepreneurs, executives, and aspiring founders. The energy in the room was electric. These were women who had built companies, shattered ceilings, and refused to accept limitations imposed by others. I announced the Second Chance Initiative. $10 million combining my grandmother's inheritance, a portion of senior tech profits and matching funds from investors who believed in the mission dedicated to helping women over 50 start businesses or careers after major life disruptions. Divorce, widowhood, family estrangement, financial abuse. These were the women corporate America ignored, the ones told they were too old to start over, too damaged to succeed, too invisible to matter. I would build the ladder I had climbed so others wouldn't have to climb from zero. The standing ovation lasted 3 full minutes. I saw tears streaming down faces throughout the audience, women who recognized their own stories in my words, who had been told they were finished and refused to believe it. Grace found me backstage afterward, her eyes glistening. She pulled me into a hug that communicated everything words couldn't capture. "Your mother would be so proud," she whispered. "Your grandmother would be amazed. And I am honored to have watched you become this person." I held her tightly, thinking about Catherine, the brilliant college student. Grace had known the ambitious young woman who had disappeared into a controlling marriage and never emerged. That stolen potential had somehow regenerated in me. The dreams my mother couldn't pursue, I was building. The independence my grandmother had fought for, I was extending to others. Legacy isn't about what you inherit. It's about what you build that outlives you. I was building something that would help women long after I was gone. As I left the conference center exhausted but fulfilled, I checked my phone for the first time in hours. Among the congratulations and media requests was a message from a number I didn't recognize. "Ms. Torres, I apologize for contacting you this way. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 28 years old, and I believe I'm the daughter you gave up for adoption when you were 19. I saw you on Time magazine, and I've been searching for years. I don't want anything from you. I just want to know where I came from. Can we talk?" 5 years have passed since that message appeared on my phone. I'm 52 now, standing in the lobby of Senior Tech Solutions' new headquarters, a building I designed with senior-friendly features that also serves as the primary training center for Second Chance Initiative graduates. The company employs over 1,000 people and serves 8 million seniors nationwide. The woman who once cleaned offices overnight now owns a building. But my greatest pride isn't the business metrics or the company valuation that has grown beyond anything I imagined. It's the wall of photographs that greets every visitor who walks through our doors. Hundreds of faces, hundreds of stories, women whose lives were transformed by the foundation I built from my grandmother's legacy. Former welfare recipients who became entrepreneurs, widows who rebuilt careers in their 60s, grandmothers who proved everyone wrong, including themselves. Each photograph represents a life that refused to accept the limitations others imposed. Sarah Mitchell, the daughter I gave up for adoption at 19 before I left home, before everything fell apart, found me through the Time magazine publicity. That first phone call was terrifying in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had buried that chapter so deeply that reopening it felt like excavating ancient grief. But Sarah didn't want a mother. She had wonderful parents who raised her with love I couldn't have provided at 19, broke and broken and barely surviving. What she wanted was connection to understand where she came from, to fill in the blank spaces in her own story. We built something careful and respectful over these 5 years. Monthly tea dates where we talk about her work as a pediatric nurse, her husband Michael, her own hopes for children someday. I attended her wedding last spring, sitting quietly in the back row, grateful beyond words for the chance to witness this life I created, but didn't raise. Some wounds heal in unexpected ways. Some family bonds are chosen rather than inherited. Today I drive to the cemetery where my mother is buried. It would have been her 75th birthday. I bring flowers, white roses her favorites, and I bring the letter she wrote before she died. The paper is worn now from how many times I've read it, the creases soft her handwriting preserved across the years. I sit beside her grave and read the letter aloud the way I have every year on this day. When I finish, I tell her about the company, the foundation, the granddaughter she never knew existed. I tell her about Sarah's wedding, about the photographs on the lobby wall, about the lives we've changed together. The grandmother who dreamed the mother, who tried in secret, the daughter who built something from the wreckage. Then I say the words I couldn't say when she was alive. I forgive you. I understand now that you were trapped, and you loved me in the only ways you could. I wish you'd been braver. I wish you'd found the courage to leave to protect me openly instead of in shadows, but I understand why you weren't and why you couldn't. The world wasn't kind to women like you, and the prison you lived in had walls I couldn't see. I place a copy of Time magazine on the grave, the one with my face on the cover, the one she held when she died. I hope wherever you are, you're finally free. Grace is waiting in the car when I return 2 cups of coffee, steaming in the holders between us. She doesn't ask how it went. She's been with me on this journey long enough to understand that some conversations don't need commentary. We have a board meeting in an hour, new initiatives to discuss more lives to change. The work continues. It always will. I start the car and glance at Grace. You know what my mother's letter said at the end? Don't let our failures define your victory. Grace nods, understanding. I didn't, I say, and I won't. This isn't an ending, it's a beginning. Set. I drive toward the future I built, toward the company and the foundation and the daughter I found and the legacy I'm creating. The past is behind me, not forgotten, not erased, but no longer a prison. I don't look back. And that is the story of Megan Torres, the woman her family called unemployed, the sister they labeled a failure, the daughter they made invisible for 47 years. She walked into that Christmas dinner as someone they pitied. She walked out as someone they would never forget. But here is what I want you to remember. Megan's story isn't just about revenge. It isn't just about watching the people who hurt her finally face consequences. It's about something much more powerful than that. It's about a woman who decided that her worth would no longer be determined by people who refused to see her. It's about building something beautiful from broken pieces. It's about forgiving not because they deserved it, but because she deserved peace. Maybe you know what it feels like to be overlooked. Maybe you've sat at a table where no one asked about your life. Maybe someone told you that you would never amount to anything, and part of you believed them. If that's you, I want you to hear this. They were wrong about Megan, and they're wrong about you too. Your worth isn't determined by people who refuse to see you. Your future isn't limited by the opinions of those who never bothered to look. The same fire that burned inside Megan, that quiet flame that refused to go out no matter how many times they tried to extinguish it, That fire lives inside you too. You are enough. You always were. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me. Have you ever been underestimated by your own family? Have you ever had to walk away from people who were supposed to love you? What part of Megan's story resonated with you the most? I read every single comment, and your stories inspire the content I create. If this video touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. I share true stories of ordinary people who did extraordinary things, stories of survival, redemption, and the incredible strength of the human spirit. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. You never know whose life you might change. Thank you